Hello everyone and welcome back to the Unexplained Diaries. Here on this channel I share real-life encounters with beings from beyond the skies to help you unwind and drift off to sleep. Before we dive in, I would love to hear from you. Leave a comment and let me know where you're tuning in from. Now, find a comfortable spot, relax, and let's begin. I parked off a dirt road just before dusk, about an hour outside of Moab. Nothing official, just a little clearing behind some scrub flat enough to pitch a tent. I'd been doing these solo desert trips for a while. No cell reception, no real plan, just a weekend to clear my head. The day had been normal, hot, dry, a little wind. I set up my tent around 6, cooked some instant rice and beans on the little camp stove, drank a beer, and watched the sunset. I remember thinking how quiet it was. Not the peaceful kind of quiet, more like a weird, empty silence. No birds, no bugs, nothing moving. But I chalked it up to being out in the middle of nowhere. After dark, I built a small fire. Nothing big, I didn't want to draw attention. Just enough to sit by for a while. I wasn't tired yet, so I stayed out there with my boots off, poking at the fire with a stick and listening to the wind come and go. At one point, I thought I heard something walking behind me, maybe 20 or 30 feet out. But when I stood up and shined my flashlight around, there was nothing. Just creosote bushes and rocks. I told myself it was probably a jackrabbit or something. It was close to midnight when I finally zipped into my tent. I'd left the rain fly off because it was warm and I wanted to see the stars. I lay there for a while, watching the sky through the mesh. The stars were insane, bright enough that I could see the faint outlines of the rocks around me. That's when I saw the lights. They were just there, perfect circle, not moving, not flickering, about 20 feet above the ground, maybe 30 feet wide, just hovering directly above my campsite, completely silent. I didn't hear them arrive. I didn't feel anything. 1 second it was just stars, and the next there was this ring of lights, not blinding, but definitely bright. Like little white spheres spaced evenly apart, forming a perfect circle. I didn't get up, I didn't move at all, I just stared at them through the mesh. My brain kind of locked up. I kept thinking they had to be drones or reflection unexplainable. But they didn't move. They didn't make a sound. And I couldn't think of anything that would look like that precise, just hanging there without a sound. After a few minutes, I don't know how many, the lights started rotating. Still keeping the same circle shape, just slowly spinning clockwise. Not fast, not wobbly, just smooth, like it was on a track. That was when the fear really kicked in. It didn't feel random. It felt like it knew I was there. I reached for my phone out of habit, but it was dead. I'd charged it before leaving, so that didn't make sense. I hadn't even used it all day. I remember hitting the power button over and over like that was going to help. Then the lights stopped spinning. Just froze in place. I don't remember falling asleep. I wasn't even tired. My heart was pounding, my mind racing. But the next thing I remember is waking up in my car. It was parked on the shoulder of a paved road, not the dirt track I'd come in on. The sun was just coming up. My mouth was dry, my eyes were gritty, and my head hurt like I'd been hungover. I was in the driver's seat, engine off, keys in the ignition. My boots were on, even though I'd taken them off before bed. My pack was on the passenger seat, zipped up. My sleeping bag was stuffed into the back. I didn't understand what I was looking at. I didn't remember breaking down camp, let alone driving anywhere. I didn't remember getting in the car. I didn't remember any road like the one I was on. I got out and looked around. No landmarks I recognized, just desert stretching in every direction. When I checked my GPS, it showed I was nearly 9 miles from where I'd set up camp. Not in a straight line either. I'd have had to drive through some rough terrain to get where I was. I drove back toward the area where I thought my site had been. It took me a while. I had to retrace my route from memory, but I eventually found the clearing. It looked wrong. Not like someone had broken camp, but like nothing had ever been there. The ground wasn't disturbed, no fire ring, no marks from tent stakes. No footprints, even though I knew I'd walked back and forth a bunch while setting up. I searched around for a while, looked behind bushes, checked the little dry wash nearby, even climbed a low ridge to see if maybe I'd camped in the wrong spot. But nothing. It was like I'd never been there. I started getting this crawling feeling like I was being watched. No reason for it. Just that skin-prickling sense that something was nearby, even though I couldn't see anything. I got back in the car and locked the doors without really thinking about it. When I checked my phone again, it powered on like nothing had happened. Full charge, no missed calls, no weird glitches. The time was right, the date was right, but there were no photos. I always take a few when I'm camping. Sunset shots, campfire, gear setup. But the last photo was from the gas station I'd stopped at on the way in. No evidence I'd ever set foot at that campsite. I made it back to Moab and sat in a diner parking lot for an hour, trying to wrap my head around it. I kept checking my phone for something I'd missed. Maybe I'd uploaded the photos and forgot, but there was nothing. No tent in the trunk, no camp stove, no food, just my sleeping bag and pack, like I'd been car camping the whole time. I even checked myself over for scratches, sunburn, anything that might tell me I'd been outside. Nothing. Just a dull ache in my arms and neck, like I'd slept in a weird position. That night, back at my place, I had trouble sleeping. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that ring of lights. Perfect circle, spinning slowly, not making a sound, just hanging there like it was waiting for something. I haven't been camping since. I was working on a line repair job in a remote part of the Cascades, way off the main road, maybe 15 miles from the nearest town. One of those spots you can't drive to. We hiked the gear in over a couple miles of old logging trail. No cell signal, no houses, just forest and mountains. I'd been out there for 3 days, solo, clearing limbs and inspecting hardware after a storm knocked out a stretch of feeder lines. The job itself was routine. Nothing too damaged, just slow work. Climb, inspect, clear, repeat. I'd camp nearby and work through the daylight. I'd done a few of these before. Not fun, but peaceful in a way. Quiet. You start to feel like the woods are your whole world. The weird stuff started on the second morning. I woke up and went to grab my multi-tool from the rock I'd left it on by the tent, and it stuck slightly to my hand when I picked it up. Just a small tug, like static cling or something, but it was enough to make me stop and check. When I set it back down on the rock, it kind of twitched and slid a little toward my hand as I hovered over it. I didn't think magnetism at first. I thought maybe I was overtired or the rock was sloped or something. But later, when I clipped the tool onto my belt, I noticed my wrench sticking slightly to the back of my glove, and my spare carabiner felt weirdly hard to pull off my harness loop, like it was caught on something. By the time I got up the first pole that morning, the little nuts and bolts I'd brought in a side pouch were clumping together inside it like they'd all been magnetized. It was subtle, but definitely not normal. My gloves started picking up fine metal shavings from my file like they were dust. At one point I set my screwdriver on a rock and it stayed upright, wobbling just slightly like it had been pulled into place. None of my electronics were acting up. The voltmeter was reading fine. My headlamp still worked, but the magnetism thing kept happening throughout the day. I'd stop working and try to test it just out of curiosity. Sometimes things would stick, sometimes not, but it kept happening just enough to feel off. And it was only with the tools I'd brought with me, not the metal on the poles or the line hardware. That night, I sat in the camp with my headlamp off, just watching the sky while I ate. It was clear, full of stars, cool breeze, absolutely silent. Then I saw this brief flash, maybe half a second long, way up high above the trees. Not like lightning, more like a camera flash behind a thin sheet. No sound, nothing followed it. I figured maybe a meteor or a distant plane catching sunlight. I waited for more, but that was it. The next morning, the magnetism was gone. Tools acted normal, nothing stuck together. I almost convinced myself I'd imagined it. Went back to work like usual. But around midday, I started noticing something up in the canopy. I was on a slope that gave me a good angle up through the trees, and at first I thought it was just sun glare or weird bark patterns. But there were shapes in the treetops, faint but real. Circles, mostly, but not natural-looking ones. Too perfect. Some of them overlapped in precise arcs, like stencils. And they weren't carved or broken branches. They looked more like discoloration, like the needles themselves had been lightly scorched. I climbed up one of the poles to get a better view. From higher up, I could see more of them, spread across maybe a quarter-mile of canopy. Just faint rings and intersecting lines, maybe 20 feet wide each, like some kind of pattern had been traced across the forest from above. Not burned deep, just singed enough to change the color of the leaves. You wouldn't notice from the ground unless you were really looking. I started to feel really uneasy then. I didn't hear anything, didn't see anyone, but I kept catching myself turning around like I'd heard a branch snap, or like someone had walked up behind me. Every few minutes I'd stop and just listen. Total silence, but it felt heavy, like the air was waiting. I finished out the day early, packed up, and radioed in. No response, but that wasn't unusual in that area. I decided I'd hike out the next morning and call from the truck. That night, I couldn't sleep. The tent felt too exposed, even with the rainfly zipped and my headlamp within reach. Around 2 or 3 a.m., I stepped outside to piss and just stood there for a while, trying to get my nerves under control. That's when I saw the glow. It was coming from deeper in the woods. Not bright, more like a soft dome of light, filtered through the trees, pale bluish white, not flickering like firelight, not moving like a flashlight. It just sat there. I couldn't see a source, just this hazy illumination maybe 200 yards out, low to the ground. I crouched and watched it for a long time. It didn't move, didn't change. It was dead silent. No insects, no wind, no animal sounds. I thought about going toward it, but I couldn't get my legs to move. At some point, I must have gone back into the tent because I woke up fully dressed with my boots on, stiff from sleeping half sitting against the side wall. It was morning. Gray light through the trees. The glow was gone. I packed everything as fast as I could, skipped breakfast, and hiked out in just over an hour. On the drive back, I kept checking the rear view, like something was going to come up behind me on the road. Nothing ever did. I turned the gear in back at the depot and didn't say anything about what I saw. The magnetic stuff was gone by then. The tools were normal. I don't even know how I would have explained the treetop markings without sounding like a lunatic. A few weeks later, I checked satellite maps of the area, just out of curiosity. No clearings or structures where I'd seen the light. Nothing but trees. I zoomed in as far as I could, but the resolution wasn't good enough to make anything out. I haven't taken another solo job since. We were somewhere between Tonopah and Caliente, out on Route 6, middle of the Nevada desert. It was late, like after midnight, but the kids had finally passed out in the back, and my wife was dozing with her head against the window. I had the radio low and the cruise set at 70, just trying to knock out the long stretch before our motel in Caliente. It was empty out there. No other headlights, no gas stations, nothing. Just that 2-lane highway and scrub stretching out forever in both directions. The kind of place where the sky feels too big and too quiet. I kept checking the rear view like I expected someone to come up behind us, but there was never anyone there. About halfway between Warm Springs and Lunar Crater, the radio fuzzed out. Not like a slow fade, just gone, like someone cut the power. The screen still showed the station name, but no sound. I tried scanning. Nothing. Every channel was just static. Then the GPS started acting weird. It kept recentering the route like it was trying to relocate us, even though we were obviously still on the same road. The little arrow would slide a few hundred feet off the highway and then snap back. My phone lost signal at the same time. No bars. My wife's phone too, not even roaming. I didn't say anything at first because I figured it was just a dead zone. But I did glance at the dash clock. It said 1:18 a.m. A few miles later, the headlights picked up something on the side of the road. Not a car, just a shape. Like a tall figure, standing still right where the shoulder met the dirt. I slowed down a little. It didn't move. I couldn't make out any details, just the outline. No reflective gear, no flashlight. Just standing there in the dark. My wife stirred and asked why I was slowing down. I told her I thought I saw something. She looked, but by then it was behind us. About 10 minutes later, we saw lights ahead. At first, I thought it was another car coming toward us, but as we got closer, I realized it wasn't moving. Just two lights, side by side, maybe 20 feet off the road. When we passed them, I glanced out the driver's side window and realized they weren't headlights. They weren't even attached to anything I could see. They were just hovering there, a few feet off the ground. Bright white, not glaring, not flickering. Perfectly still. My wife saw them too. She sat up straight and asked, "What is that?" I didn't have an answer. We kept going. The lights disappeared behind us. Still no signal, no GPS. The road just kept going like it had for the last hour. Flat, straight, nothing on either side. I was starting to feel wired, like the air was too thin or something, like I was holding my breath without realizing it. Then the engine hiccuped. It wasn't a stall, just a quick drop, like everything lost power for half a second. The dashboard blinked, the headlights dimmed, and the cruise control kicked off. I had to tap the gas to keep us steady. The car never fully died, but for a second it felt like it might. The kids didn't wake up. My wife grabbed the armrest but didn't say anything. She just looked at me, waiting for me to explain what was happening. I looked down at the clock again. It still said 1:18 a.m. That's when I noticed the sky. It had been clear all night, but now the stars were gone. Not clouded over, just gone. Like a black sheet had been pulled across the sky. No moon, no glow, nothing. I even rolled the window down to check if it was tinted weird, but no, just darkness above us, like something had blocked everything out. We drove like that for maybe 10 more minutes, no sound but the tires on the pavement. The air felt thick, like pressure was building. I remember my ears popped, like we were gaining altitude fast, even though the road was flat. Then, just as fast as it had all started, everything snapped back. The radio crackled and came back on mid-song. My phone buzzed with missed notifications. The GPS lit up and recentered. The sky was clear again, stars back, moon low over the horizon. The pressure was gone. It felt like we had passed through something, but there was no marker for it. No sign. Just desert, same as before. I glanced at the clock again. It said 3:36 a.m. I thought it was a glitch. I assumed the car clock had frozen and just now corrected itself. But then the GPS route updated, and we were suddenly less than 20 minutes from Caliente. We had been at least 2.5 hours out when the radio cut. I didn't say anything. My wife didn't either. We just looked at each other. Neither of us wanted to be the first to ask the obvious question. I checked the trip counter. It hadn't jumped. The mileage made sense. The gas level too. But the time didn't. We got to the motel just before 4 a.m. The clerk barely looked up when I signed in. The kids didn't wake until late morning. None of them had any weird dreams, nothing strange. My wife kept checking her phone like she was expecting something, but she never said what. We never figured out what happened during those missing 2 hours. I used to spend a lot of late nights in my garage messing with radios. I've been into shortwave since high school, just something about scanning around and catching weird stations from halfway across the world. I'm not licensed or anything serious like that, just one of those guys with a shelf full of gear and a beat-up antenna strapped to the roof. This happened last November, around 2 in the morning. My wife was already asleep upstairs, and I'd come out to the garage to tinker around, mostly just flipping through bands out of boredom. It was one of those dry, windless nights where everything feels kind of muted. No wind, no bugs, just that soft hum from the street lamp outside and the occasional creak from the water heater. I had my Grundig set up with the loop antenna plugged in, just slowly sweeping the bands like I always did. A lot of static, occasional snippets of weird foreign broadcasts, the usual. I wasn't expecting to pick up anything interesting. Most of the traffic that time of night is just garbage. Then I landed on something around 9.4 megahertz that wasn't quite right. It started as this low, steady pulse, like a metronome, but duller. It didn't sound natural. No voice, no modulation, just this dry, electronic tick, about one every second. I listened for a bit, figured maybe it was just one of those utility stations or a test tone from a military frequency. But then it changed. The tick doubled in speed, then tripled, then dropped back down. I didn't touch anything. The frequency stayed locked, but it started forming a pattern. 3 fast ticks, pause, 1 long tick, pause, then 5 short ones in a row. Then it repeated. I grabbed a notebook and started jotting it down. I do that sometimes when I catch odd transmissions, just for fun, really. But this one kept going exactly the same, over and over. 3 short, 1 long, 5 short. Then pause. Then again, like clockwork. I listened to that loop maybe 20 times, thinking it might be Morse, but it didn't line up. I mean, maybe loosely, but it didn't translate into anything. It wasn't a message, at least not in any format I recognized, but it felt deliberate, if that makes sense, like someone or something was trying to draw attention without actually saying anything. After about 10 minutes of that, I decided to record it. I had my little digital recorder I usually use for samples. I hooked it up, hit record, and switched back to the frequency. Silence. Not static. Just nothing. Like the signal had been yanked. I thought maybe I bumped the antenna or a cable came loose, but everything looked fine. I tuned a little up and down the band, thinking maybe it shifted, but it was just dead air. The whole section of the spectrum felt empty. Not even the usual fuzz. I unplugged the recorder, switched everything back to how it was before, and suddenly the static came back. Not the signal, that was gone, but the general background noise. I sat there for maybe 20 minutes, scanning up and down to find it again. Nothing. I left the radio on while I got up to stretch. The garage felt weird, colder than it had a minute ago. Not freezing, but off. Like how a room feels after someone's just walked through it. I opened the side door and stepped out onto the driveway to get some air. Everything was quiet. I live at the edge of a neighborhood cul-de-sac. Not out in the sticks, but not dense suburban either. We've got a few motion sensor lights, and they were all dark. No wind, no cars, just dead still. When I turned to go back in, I noticed the porch light flicker once, then stay off. Figured it was a loose bulb. I walked in, flipped the switch off, and back on. Nothing. The breaker was fine. All the other lights in the garage were still working. I went back to the desk, powered the radio off, then on again. Ran through the usual bands. It was like someone had wiped the whole slice of air clean. I don't know how else to say it. You get used to a certain level of clutter on shortwave, interference, buzz, drift. But this was silent, like someone turned off the world behind the static. About an hour later, I gave up and went inside. Checked the clock on the oven, 3:13. My watch said 3:24. I remember squinting at it, trying to remember if I'd set it wrong or if the power had gone out, but everything else in the kitchen was on time. I woke up later that morning feeling wired and kind of off, like I hadn't really slept, even though I'd been out for hours. The first thing I did was check the recorder. There was a file on it. 12 seconds of me plugging in the cable. Then silence. Not even hiss. That whole day, I kept thinking about that pattern. 3 fast, 1 long, 5 fast. I caught myself writing it down again at work, like it was stuck in my head. I ran it through some online Morse decoders, tried treating it like binary, looked up numbers stations archives, nothing matched. It didn't exist, at least not anywhere I could find. The next night, I went back out, tried to replicate the setup exactly. Same frequency, same antenna, same gear. Nothing. I even left the recorder running for an hour just in case. Picked up a couple weird bleeps from South America and what might have been Russian naval traffic, but not that pulse. I tried for a week straight, same time, same band. It never came back. But here's the part that really stuck with me. A few nights later, around the same time, 2:15 or so, I was out back letting the dog out. It was cold and clear. I looked up, just kind of zoning out, and I saw what looked like a satellite, one of those steady, slow-moving dots crossing the sky. Except this one stopped, right above the house, dead stop. No wobble, no drift, just hung there for maybe 10 seconds. Then it blinked once and faded out. I didn't tell my wife about any of it, just said I was having issues with the radio and left it at that. I packed up most of my gear the next day. Still have it, just haven't touched it since. Not sure why. Nothing really happened, but it's like something opened for a second then shut again. And I was just close enough to know I wasn't supposed to be there. I was driving back from a friend's place out in the country, about an hour and a half from where I live. It was almost midnight when I left, later than I meant to, and I took backroads most of the way. Flat, open farmland, not much traffic. One-lane roads, no streetlights, the kind of route where you don't pass another car for 20 minutes at a time. It was quiet. I had the radio off, windows cracked a little, just cruising. I wasn't tired, but I remember feeling kind of spaced out. You get that way sometimes on those long, empty drives, like you're the only person awake in the whole world. I noticed the blinking light maybe 15 minutes in. It was off to the right, low in the sky. White, steady blink. Not fast, not random. About every 2 seconds. I figured it was a plane at first, or maybe a tower light way off in the distance. It didn't really bother me, just something to look at. But it started getting weird when I made a left turn at a four-way intersection. I wasn't thinking about the light, just following my GPS, but after I turned, it was still in the exact same spot. Off to the right, same distance, same blink pattern. Like it had turned with me. I slowed down and looked at it harder. It wasn't flashing red or green like a plane, just white, and always at the same rhythm. I thought maybe it was a drone, but who flies a drone way out there at night? After a few more turns, I started paying attention. Every time I changed direction, the light stayed at the same angle, always off to the right, never closer, never farther, like it was stuck to my car in the sky somehow. I rolled the window down more and stuck my head out while driving. No sound. If it was a drone, it was flying silent. I pulled over onto the gravel shoulder and turned the engine off just to see. The blinking kept going, same pace. It didn't move, didn't hover or wobble or drift, just blinked, still off to my right, above the cornfields. I sat there for maybe a minute, waiting for it to do something, move, fly off, anything. It didn't. So I started driving again. A few miles later, I passed a farmhouse with the porch light on. I had this brief thought about pulling in and asking if they'd seen it too, but I didn't. I don't even know what I would have said. Hey, is there a weird light following me? I tried not to look at it after that. I focused on the road, tried to convince myself it was just some radio tower I kept seeing from different angles. But a couple more turns, and it still hadn't changed position. Then, maybe 20 minutes from home, I drove through a little dip in the road. A kind of shallow valley where trees lined both sides. I lost sight of the light for a bit. The road curved slightly left, then back right. When I came up out of the dip, the light was gone. I actually felt relieved for a second. Like, okay, whatever it was, maybe I'd just gotten out of range or passed behind a hill. Then I saw it again, in my rearview mirror. Same blinking, same height, same rhythm. Except now it was behind me, not coming toward me, just there, like it had repositioned without me seeing it move. That was when I got really uncomfortable. I didn't feel like I was in danger exactly, but it was this deep, tense kind of feeling, like something wasn't right and I shouldn't be out there. I sped up. Not crazy fast, but faster than I'd been going. I kept checking the mirror. The light stayed behind me, never getting closer or farther, always blinking, always the same spot. About 10 minutes out from town, I passed another car going the opposite way. First one I'd seen all night. I had this sudden idea. Maybe the light would follow them instead. Like maybe it wasn't about me, maybe it just picked random cars. But after they passed, I checked the mirror again. Still there, still blinking. I turned onto the highway that runs into town. It's a little more built up. A few gas stations, some traffic lights. The blinking light faded into the background once I got closer to the edge of town. Too many other lights. I kept looking for it, but I couldn't spot it anymore. I pulled into a gas station and parked under the awning. Just sat there for a bit, hands on the wheel, watching the sky. Nothing, just stars. A couple planes way up high, regular stuff. I went inside to grab a water, didn't say anything to the cashier. When I came back out, I looked around one more time. The light wasn't there. I drove home. No more blinking, no strange lights, just normal night. The next day I checked online for any kind of tower map, just to see if there were any installations out there that might match what I saw. Nothing in the right spot. And anyway, it had moved with me. Towers don't do that. I still don't know what it was. Maybe there's a simple answer and I just didn't think of it. But I've done that drive a dozen times since, and I've never seen anything like that again. I was working nights as a security guard for a corporate office park just outside Kansas City. It wasn't a bad gig, Mostly quiet, mostly boring. My shift was 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., and I was usually the only one on site besides the occasional janitorial staff who came through once or twice a week. The security office was on the ground floor of the main building, right off the lobby. There were 9 monitors on the wall, each tied to different cameras around the property. Parking lots, loading docks, the main entrance, a couple interior hallways. We had motion alerts set up on a few of them, but they were overly sensitive. Sometimes a moth would trigger one, sometimes wind. That night, I think it was mid-February, I was alone like usual. It was just past 2 a.m. I remember because I just finished logging my hourly check and poured myself a coffee from the thermos. The monitors were quiet. 2 cars were in the north lot. One was mine, the other belonged to an admin who'd left it there over the weekend. No lights, no movement. I was scrolling on my phone when I caught something flicker on screen. It was camera 4, the wide shot of the south parking lot. It faced the side of the building and the lot beyond it. There were no cars parked over there, and the area wasn't especially well lit. The only light came from 2 poles near the perimeter and the overhead glow from the building itself. In the center of the screen, right where the painted lines met in a little T-shape, there was someone standing there. Not walking, not moving, just standing. They were far from the camera, maybe 100 feet out, but they looked human. Upright, still, facing the building. No flashlight, no reflective clothing, no visible features. Just a person-shaped figure in the middle of an empty lot at 2:13 a.m. I sat there and watched it for a few seconds, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light or maybe a smudge on the lens, but I could see the shadow it cast under the pole light behind it. A thin, angled line like it was real. I flipped the feed to zoom. The camera wasn't high res, but it confirmed what I thought. Someone was just standing there. Arms at their sides. Not moving at all. I checked the motion logs. Nothing had triggered. No alerts. That made me pause. Usually it'd go off if a cat ran across the sidewalk. I waited another few seconds, still staring, then picked up my flashlight and radio and went out through the stairwell door. I didn't want to use the main lobby doors because they were all glass, and I didn't know if whoever it was could see in. I came around the side of the building quietly, keeping low behind the hedges. The lot looked empty. I didn't see anyone. I moved a little closer, aiming my flashlight out into the center where the figure had been. Nothing. Just painted asphalt and 2 empty handicap spots. I stood there for a long time, sweeping the light side to side, checking every angle. No movement, no footsteps. The lot was flat and wide open. You couldn't walk across it without being seen from at least one of the cameras. There was nowhere to hide. After maybe 3 or 4 minutes of looking, I went back inside. I figured maybe I'd misread the video, maybe a weird shadow or something. But when I got back to the security office and rewound the footage, it was still there, clear as anything. The figure stood in place for about 37 seconds, then just wasn't there in the next frame. No walking, no fading out. Just there, 1 second, gone the next. No alerts, no motion trigger, nothing. I tried switching to the other angles, the adjacent camera that covered the back lot and the one above the stairwell door I'd come out of. Neither of them caught the figure at all. Even though camera 5 should have had partial coverage of the same area, the spot where the person had been was just empty. I sat there for a while after that, just letting the monitors run. I didn't want to go back out. Around 3:45, camera 4 flickered again. Same spot. I stared at the screen and there it was again. Same posture, same spot, standing under the pole light. Still no movement. This time I didn't go outside, I just sat and watched. My hands were kind of sweaty and I kept double checking the timestamps. It stood there for almost a full minute. Then again, gone. Not walking away, not ducking out of frame, just gone between 2 frames. I saved both clips to the drive and made a note in the log that I'd had camera interference. Didn't say anything about what I saw. At the end of my shift, I went out to check the lot again in daylight. There was nothing there. No footprints, no trash, no scuff marks. I even checked the pole light for maintenance issues. Everything looked normal. When the day guy came in, I acted casual and didn't mention anything. I was halfway convinced I'd hallucinated it or maybe dozed off for a second and dreamed it. But the footage was real. I watched it again that night before my next shift started. Both clips clear as anything, standing still, then gone. The next few nights were normal. No figure, no weirdness. Then, about a week later, I came in for my shift and noticed camera 4 was offline. I called maintenance and they said the unit had shorted out. When they pulled it, the tech said the lens was burnt around the edges, like it had been exposed to a high heat source. No explanation for it. They replaced it a couple days later, but I never saw anything like that again. I still have the 2 clips saved on an old USB somewhere, but I don't watch them anymore. I already know what I saw. We'd been out since just before dawn. It was late October, cool and damp, frost still clinging to the grass when we parked the truck. Me and Wes had hunted this patch of forest for years, just north of the state line, about 40 minutes from his place. We had tags, we had permits, we were doing it by the book. We'd split off early, met back around noon to eat, then headed deeper into the woods. It was quieter out there, fewer trails, thicker trees. Not many people bothered going that far back unless they were serious about it. Around 2:30, we spotted movement across a gully. Something big. Didn't look like a buck. Too low to the ground. Moved different. We couldn't tell for sure, but we figured maybe a black bear. Could have been a hog, but it didn't have the right build. We didn't speak, just looked at each other, nodded, and started tracking it. We crossed the gully and found a trail, heavy prints in the mud, but no real shape to them. Just deep dents like something heavy had passed through. The brush was pushed down in a straight line, not wandering like deer usually do. It wasn't running either, just moving steady like it knew where it was going. We followed it for a while, maybe 15 minutes. We were moving slow, careful not to make noise. I remember noticing how unusually still everything was. No wind, no birds, no squirrels. At first, I figured maybe the animal had scared them off, but it felt like more than that. Like the whole forest had shut off. I whispered something to Wes about it, but he didn't say anything. He just looked around like he'd noticed it too. The trail led us to a denser part of the woods. Big pines, tight together. The ground softened under our boots with old needles and damp soil. That's when it started getting strange. The sound just stopped. I don't mean it got quiet. I mean it stopped. We both paused at the same time. I turned to say something to Wes and realized I couldn't hear my own footsteps. I tapped the butt of my rifle against the tree next to me, and it didn't make a sound. I could feel it in my hand, the vibration of the impact, but there was no noise. Not muffled, not faint, just nothing. I looked at Wes and he had this weird, frozen expression. He moved his mouth, but I didn't hear anything come out. I tried saying his name. Nothing. There was no ringing in my ears, no pressure like when your ears pop. It was like being underwater, but without the distortion. Just complete silence. We stood there like that for maybe a minute, trying to figure out what the hell was going on. Then we noticed the light had changed. It wasn't darker, exactly, but the shadows looked wrong, softer. The sunlight filtering through the trees had this weird tint to it, kind of silvery. Hard to describe, Zach, but it didn't look natural. That's when we saw the thing above the trees. It was huge, took up the whole sky above us, but not like a cloud or a storm. It was a solid shape, smooth and dark, almost black, but with this faint shimmer around the edges like heat rising off asphalt. No sound, no wind, just hanging there above the canopy. I couldn't make out details, not really. No markings or lights, just a big matte shape, maybe oval or diamond shaped. The trees blocked most of it, but you could see the way the tops bent slightly, like they were being pulled upward. Not breaking, just leaning. I remember looking at Wes and seeing his hands shaking. I hadn't noticed mine were too. Neither of us moved. I don't think we could have if we wanted to. My legs felt like they were full of sand. Then, slowly, the silence started to lift. It wasn't all at once. First, I heard a dry snap of a branch behind me, then the faint rustling of leaves. Then, like someone turning up a volume knob, all the little forest sounds started to return. Birds chirping, wind in the trees, distant insects. I turned back toward the sky and the object was gone. No movement, no sound, just gone. We stood there another couple minutes, trying to process it. Wes finally said something. Just a quiet, "What the fuck was that?" and I felt this weird jolt, like I'd forgotten what his voice sounded like. We didn't talk much after that. We headed straight back toward the truck, didn't even bother checking the trail. It felt like we'd walked into something we weren't supposed to see. When we got back, it was 4:45. The walk should have taken maybe 30 minutes. We'd lost over an hour somewhere, and neither of us remembered stopping that long. We didn't say anything to anyone, didn't make a report. I didn't even bring it up again for almost a year. Then, one night, we were drinking on Wes's porch, and he asked me out of nowhere, "You ever think about that thing in the woods?" I said, "Yeah, pretty often." It was during winter break, sometime in late December. I was 16 and living at my parents' place out in a small town in central Oregon. Not totally middle of nowhere, but quiet. Not much light pollution. We had a decent-sized backyard, a couple pine trees at the edge of the property line, and beyond that, just empty fields for a few miles before the next subdivision. I'd gotten into stargazing around then. Nothing serious, just a cheap telescope from a garage sale and a free app on my phone that told you what you were looking at. Most nights, I just lay on a blanket with a hoodie and watched planes go by, or tried to find Jupiter. This happened around 11 at night. It was cold but clear. Crisp air, no clouds. I remember because it was one of those nights where you can see your breath hang in the air for a second, even when you're not exhaling hard. I'd brought out a thermos of tea and some headphones, but I hadn't started listening to anything yet, just watching. I was looking up near Orion, trying to find the Horsehead Nebula, when I noticed 3 stars off to the side, way higher and more east than where I was focusing. They weren't part of any constellation I recognized, and they were bright, not moving, not blinking like planes, just steady white lights. 2 were sort of close together, and the third one was a little farther off, like a stretched triangle. I wouldn't have thought anything of it except they started to move. Not fast, slow enough that I wasn't even sure they were moving at first. But after maybe 10 seconds, I realized they were inching toward each other. The 2 closer ones drifted just a little, then the third adjusted to match. It all happened really gradually, like watching a clock hand move. But after about a minute, they'd formed a perfect equilateral triangle, and then they just stopped. Not wobbling, not drifting, locked in. I remember thinking how exact it looked, like someone drew it with a ruler. And it stayed like that for maybe 30 seconds. No noise, no trails, just completely still. Then, just as slowly, they drifted out of it, but not back into their original spots. They just sort of unraveled. Like the triangle shape never mattered. One peeled off to the left. Another dropped slightly. They all kept moving, but not in sync anymore. After a minute or two, they'd completely lost the pattern. I sat up on my elbows and kept watching. I didn't know what to do. I remember looking at my phone to make sure it hadn't frozen or glitched. The time kept moving normally. After maybe 5 minutes of slow drifting, the 3 lights just dimmed, like someone slowly turned down a dimmer switch. One blinked out entirely. The others faded until I couldn't tell if they were gone or just blending in with the regular stars again. I sat there for a while longer, kind of frozen, just staring up. Eventually, I stood and scanned the sky to see if anything else looked off. Nothing did. Everything else looked exactly how it should. Orion was in the same place. I found Polaris. Even checked the app again. No satellites were listed in that part of the sky, and no scheduled ISS pass. I was about to pack up and go inside when I realized something weird about the backyard. It was quiet. Not the kind of quiet you get at night, but completely quiet. No wind, no distant cars, no barking dogs, no sound at all. That made me stop for a second. Usually, even at night, you hear something. An owl, a plane, distant highway noise. But it was like someone had stuffed cotton in my ears. It wasn't for long, maybe 10 seconds. Then a gust of wind kicked up and the sound came back all at once. Just back to normal. That part somehow bothered me more than the lights. I went inside and didn't sleep great. My chest felt tight for most of the night, like I'd just gotten startled but never came down from it. The next night, I tried to find the same 3 lights, but the sky looked normal. I stargazed a few more times that week, but never saw anything like it again. I never told my parents. I think I mentioned it to a friend a few months later, kind of like a joke, but I downplayed it. I've never seen anything like that since. I was out behind my house with the camera trying to get some long exposures of the sky. This was last October. It was cold enough to see my breath, but I was layered up and had a thermos with me. My backyard backs up to a field and then woods beyond that, no streetlights, no houses for at least a mile in that direction. Good place for stargazing. I'd only gotten into astrophotography a few months before, nothing fancy. Just a decent DSLR on a tripod, playing around with shutter times and trying to get clean shots of the Milky Way. That night was especially clear. Crisp sky, no moon, no clouds. I'd already taken a few dozen photos and was letting the camera cool off while I drank some coffee. That's when I noticed one of the stars was moving. I don't mean it was a plane or a satellite. I know what those look like. I check flight radar sometimes just to be sure. This was slow, barely perceptible at first. It looked like a normal star, same brightness, no blinking, no tail. I thought maybe my eyes were tired or something was drifting across my vision. So I set the camera to live view, zoomed in, and aimed at it. And sure enough, it was dropping. Not fast, just slowly inching down the sky, maybe a couple pixels every 10 seconds. It was coming straight down, no arc, no wobble. I watched for a solid minute before I started feeling uneasy. It didn't feel like something far away. Stars don't move like that. Satellites don't descend like that. And it wasn't a drone. I've flown drones. I know how their lights look. This thing didn't change shape, didn't flicker, didn't make any sound at all. I backed away from the camera and looked at it with my own eyes again. It was definitely lower than before. Still small, still star-like, but now it was a little brighter. Not dramatically, just enough to notice. Like it was getting closer. It kept dropping. Maybe half a degree every minute. At some point it stopped looking like a star and more like a bright dot, just hovering there, maybe a few hundred feet above the tree line. Perfectly still. I realized then that everything had gone quiet. No crickets, no wind in the trees, not even the distant hum from the highway I usually hear if I really listen. Just stillness, like the world had paused. I turned the camera toward it and took a few quick shots. Long exposure, 5 seconds each. When I checked the screen, it wasn't there. Nothing but black sky. I adjusted the ISO, increased the shutter time, tried again, still nothing. But I could see it with my own eyes, clear as anything. That made me feel strange. Not panicked, but off. Like I was standing too close to something I shouldn't be seeing. I turned the camera off and just stared at it. I don't know how long I stood there. Maybe 5 minutes, maybe more. It didn't move. Didn't change brightness, just hung in the air like someone had pinned it there. Then it blinked out, not faded, not drifted away. It was just gone, like someone flipped a switch. And the second it disappeared, all the background noise came back. Crickets, a dog barking in the distance, a breeze rustling the grass. My ears popped slightly, like pressure had changed, and I realized my hands were shaking a little. I stayed out there for another 15 minutes, just in case it came back. It didn't. When I finally packed up and went inside, I checked the camera card. All the photos from before the star started moving were fine. The later ones, where I aimed directly at it, were just black. Not even static or blur, just pure black, like the shutter didn't open at all. The next morning I went back out to the same spot and aimed the camera the same way, tried to replicate it. Same settings, same position. Got normal night sky photos. Stars, planes, even a faint satellite trail. Everything showed up fine, but whatever that thing was, it didn't register. It was just gone. I didn't tell anyone for a few weeks. None. Then I mentioned it to a guy at work who's into astronomy. He asked if it could have been a weather balloon, but that didn't make sense. Balloons don't stay perfectly still for 10 minutes in the same spot, and they don't just vanish midair. I still go out to shoot the sky sometimes, but I haven't seen anything like that again. Nothing that quiet, nothing that strange. We were cruising at 38,000 feet, somewhere over Nevada. I don't remember the exact time, but it was dark out, probably around 2 a.m. The weather was smooth. No turbulence, no clouds, just stars above and the soft glow of cities way below. One of those long, quiet overnight stretches where the autopilot does most of the work and you're just monitoring gauges, chatting lightly, sipping lukewarm coffee. There were two of us up front, me and my first officer, Dan. Good guy, ex-military, sharp. We were flying a standard passenger jet, about 3/4 full. The cabin was dark and quiet. I just finished checking in with ATC and was flipping through the weather radar when Dan leaned forward, squinting out the left side of the cockpit. "You see that?" he asked. I looked where he was pointing, low and a little ahead of our nose, maybe 10 degrees off center. At first I didn't notice anything, but then I caught a movement. A light. White and steady, not blinking like a commercial aircraft beacon. It was far off, too far to judge speed or altitude, but it stood out, especially that high up where there shouldn't be much else flying. We watched it in silence for a minute. It wasn't getting closer, just kind of holding position. I radioed ATC, asked if they had any traffic in our vicinity at that altitude. "Negative," they said. "Only known traffic is you. Radar is clear at your altitude and above." Dan and I looked at each other. That was the first point where something felt off. Civilian aircraft don't operate that high, especially not in the middle of the night with no transponder, no clearance, and no lights other than a single white glow. About 30 seconds after that call, the light moved. It didn't bank, didn't arc, it just slid sideways, smooth, like it was gliding on glass. It kept its distance, but moved from the left side of our nose across to the right, then stopped again. I've been flying for 20 years. I've never seen anything maneuver like that. No tilt, no drift, just a perfect lateral motion. "Could be military," Dan said quietly, but he didn't sound convinced. I tried hailing it on guard frequency, just in case. "Aircraft at my 11 o'clock, this is November," etc. No reply. Tried again, nothing. The object started matching our movements after that. I nudged the yoke gently to the left, just a few degrees. The light mirrored us, same direction, same speed, held formation for maybe a minute. I leveled out, so did it. I dipped down slightly, just enough to lose a couple 100 feet. The light mirrored that too, perfectly, precisely, like it was tethered to us by an invisible line. That's when my stomach started to knot. I don't scare easy up there. You learn to stay calm, troubleshoot, run checklists, but this thing wasn't behaving like anything normal. No strobes, no heat signature on our IR sensors. It wasn't triggering any TCAS alerts. Nothing. We kept watching it, mostly in silence. I think both of us were trying not to say what we were thinking. It stayed with us like that for almost 10 minutes. Never got closer than a couple miles, never drifted off, just matched speed and direction, responding to every tiny adjustment we made. Like it was studying us, or waiting for something. Then, as suddenly as it had appeared, it shot straight up. No arc, no trail, no sound, just an instant vertical climb, faster than anything I've ever seen. 1 second it was there. The next, it was a pinpoint above us. Then nothing. Just empty sky and stars again. I checked the radar, still clear. I asked ATC if they had anything above 60,000 feet. They said no. Nothing on any scope, no military exercises planned in that corridor. They asked if I wanted to file a report. I said no. At the time, I just wanted to finish the route, land the plane, and put it out of my head. Dan didn't say much the rest of the flight. Neither did I. We both wrote notes afterward. Just in case. Personal records. We didn't log it officially. We knew how that would go. They'd chalk it up to fatigue, atmospheric distortion, a weather balloon, whatever. I've flown that route a dozen times since. Never saw it again. Never saw anything like it. I was walking my dog around 9:30 at night. It had rained earlier, so everything was damp and the air smelled like wet pavement and grass. We live in a quiet neighborhood. Older houses, big yards, no sidewalks, just 2-lane streets and a lot of trees. I usually take the same route every night, past the same houses, same hedges and fences. My dog, Lucy, is a medium-sized mutt. Sweet, friendly, not the type to bark at random things. She's usually calm on our walks unless we pass a cat or another dog. That night, she was on edge almost from the start. She kept stopping to sniff things she normally ignores. Mailboxes, puddles, a crack in the curb, and her ears were up the whole time. I tugged her along, figuring she was just distracted by all the new smells from the rain. About 15 minutes in, we were coming up the street that runs behind my neighbor's house. They've got a big yard that slopes down toward a line of trees with one of those short chain link fences along the back. There's a tall wooden privacy fence along the sides, but the backyard itself is pretty open. Their porch light was off, but there was enough ambient light from other houses and the cloudy sky to see. That's when I noticed something crouched by the fence. At first, I thought it was a deer, then I realized there were 3 of them. Not deer. Smaller. Too small to be people, but too big to be raccoons or dogs. They were shaped kind of like kids, maybe the size of a 10-year-old, but with really thin limbs and big heads. They were crouched down, all 3 facing the fence, like they were doing something to it. Lucy froze. Her ears went straight up, and her whole body went rigid. She didn't growl or bark, just stared. I stopped walking and tried to make sense of what I was seeing. It was too dark to make out any detail, but their skin looked pale, almost gray in the ambient light. They weren't moving much. One of them shifted slightly, and the motion was weird, smooth but jerky at the same time, like it wasn't used to how its joints worked. I stood there for a few seconds, unsure what to do. Then I cleared my throat and said, "Hey, what are you doing?" They all turned toward me at once. I don't know how to explain this part. They didn't look surprised or scared, just aware, like I'd interrupted something. Their eyes reflected light, like animals do, but not in the same way. It wasn't a red or green reflection. It was this dim, silvery gleam, like light off metal. They held still for maybe a second. Then all 3 of them bolted. They didn't run like people or animals. It was fast. Faster than anything that size should move, and totally silent. No footsteps, no rustling grass, nothing. They scattered in different directions, but not randomly. It was like they had pre-planned exits. One darted along the fence line and vanished into the trees. Another slipped between 2 bushes and was just gone. The third one moved toward the far corner of the yard and seemed to almost melt into the shadows. I tried to follow it with my eyes, but lost track of it halfway across the yard. Lucy started whining and tugged at the leash, trying to head back the way we came. I stood there for another minute, trying to convince myself I'd just seen some neighborhood kids playing a prank or something. But no kid moves like that. And there was no noise. None. No talking, no giggling, no sound of footsteps. Just gone. I walked quickly after that. Not quite running, but close. I kept looking over my shoulder, and Lucy kept glancing behind us too. She didn't relax until we were a block away, and even then she was walking close to my leg like she does during thunderstorms. When we got home, I locked the door and checked all the windows. I turned on the porch light, which I don't usually do, and left it on the rest of the night. I couldn't shake the feeling that those things had known I was watching them before I even spoke, like they were aware of me the whole time. The next day, I walked past the same yard in daylight. Nothing looked disturbed. Grass wasn't trampled. Fence was fine. No footprints or anything unusual. I stood there for a minute, just looking at the spot where they'd been, but it felt different in the sunlight. Smaller. Normal. I still walk Lucy every night, but I've changed our route. I don't go past that yard anymore. Not because I think they'll be there again, but because I'm scared they won't be. It was around 3:15 in the morning, middle of a long haul between Laredo and Phoenix. I'd pulled out of El Paso a couple hours earlier and was deep into that stretch of I-10 where the road flattens out and everything just kind of blurs into empty desert. No towns, no exits, just headlights and blacktop. I'd stopped at a rest area back in Sierra Blanca to stretch my legs and take a piss. Checked my watch before getting back in the cab, 3:09. I remember that because I was trying to decide whether I'd make it to Lordsburg by sunrise or not. Anyway, traffic was non-existent, just me and whatever was on the radio. I had the window cracked a little for fresh air and was nursing a gas station coffee that tasted like burnt cardboard. The road was dead quiet, except for my engine and tires humming along. That's when I saw the light. It wasn't headlights or anything like that. It was a single orb, glowing kind of bluish white. Hard to say how big it was, but maybe the size of a basketball. It came from the right side of the road, low, maybe 10 feet off the ground, and crossed directly in front of my truck. Fast, but smooth. It didn't bob or dip, just a steady horizontal glide. No sound. I hit the brakes, not hard, but enough to slow down, just out of reflex. It was close, maybe 40 yards ahead, and gone in 2 or 3 seconds. It crossed the road and disappeared into the dark on the other side. No flash, no trail. Just blinked out into the scrubland. I sat up straighter, blinked a few times, thinking maybe I just imagined it. But my heart was going a little faster, and I noticed my arms had goosebumps. I coasted for a bit before easing back on the gas. When I passed the spot where it had crossed, I slowed down again and looked out the side window. There was nothing. Just rocks, low brush, and blackness. No fences, no utility poles, no towers. I rolled the window down all the way and leaned out. No sound, no wind, just empty. I looked down at my dashboard clock and it said 3:13, which didn't feel right. I glanced at my watch again, 3:19. I frowned, thinking maybe my dashboard clock had just reset or something, but I'd checked both earlier at the rest stop and they'd matched. I remember checking because I'd been thinking about calling my wife and wanted to make sure it wasn't too late. The dash clock and my watch were both at 3:09 when I left. Now they were 6 minutes apart. I tapped the clock, thinking maybe it was a glitch or bump in the road, and messed it up. But it was digital and locked in. I turned on my dome light, double-checked my wristwatch. Still 3:19. I remember holding my wrist up toward the dash like I was waiting for them to sync back up or something, but they didn't. I drove a little while longer, just trying to shake it off. Told myself it was just a weird coincidence. The light, the clock, maybe I'd zoned out for a minute. But that didn't sit right. I hadn't been tired, and 6 minutes isn't zoning out. That's a full-length song. That's 2 exits. That's enough time to know something's off. I kept glancing at the sky after that. I don't usually do that when I'm driving. It's just stars or clouds, and you've got to keep your eyes on the road. But I couldn't help it. I'd look up between billboards and check the rear view every now and then, like I expected to see that light again. I didn't. About 30 minutes later, I passed a mile marker and realized I was making better time than I should have been. Not by much, maybe 6 or 7 minutes. But still, it lined up too clean with the missing time on the dash clock. I checked both again. Wrist said 3:47. Dash said 3:41. I drove the rest of the way into Lordsburg without stopping. Pulled into the truck plaza and parked. I got out, walked around the rig, checked the tires, just needed to do something with my hands. Everything looked fine. No dings, no dents, no weird scorch marks or whatever I half expected to find. Inside, I bought another coffee and made a dumb joke to the cashier about being the only one alive on that highway. She just nodded, like she'd heard worse. I thought about mentioning the light, but didn't. Not sure why. I just didn't want to hear her tell me it was probably a drone or swamp gas or whatever. Back in the truck, I synced the dash clock to my watch manually. It stayed in sync the rest of the trip. But I think about that light a lot. Not just how it moved or where it went, but that quiet, that totally dead silence when it passed. I drive through the desert all the time, and it's never completely silent. There's always some wind, a rattle, an engine hum, but right then, nothing. Like the whole stretch of road held its breath. And those 6 minutes. I don't have a good reason for why the dash clock lost time, but the watch didn't. Or why it was only 6 minutes. Or why it happened right when that thing flew by. I've seen all kinds of weird crap on the road. Accidents, people walking barefoot in the middle of nowhere, animals staring at you from the brush. But this was different. This didn't feel like something I was supposed to see. We were camped out near Crescent Lake, about 2 hours from town. 4 of us, me, Kyle, Jordan, and Meg, all in our late 20s. We'd done that spot a couple times before, but never this late in the season. It was mid-October, cold enough at night that you had to layer up, but the daytime was still decent. No one else was out there. We didn't see a single other tent or car the whole time. The first night was normal. We set up camp in the usual clearing just off the east side of the lake. There's a little trail that leads down to a flat, rocky area right on the shoreline, kind of a natural overlook. We'd drag chairs down there and drink, sometimes build a little fire in one of those cheap metal pits Kyle always brings. That's where we were the second night around 10:30, just hanging out. Meg noticed it first. She was facing the water and I was turned toward her, so I saw her freeze a little and narrow her eyes over my shoulder. At first she didn't say anything, just kind of stared. Then she said, "What is that?" Not in a panicked way, more curious. I turned around. There was a light, maybe the size of a golf ball from where we were sitting, just floating over the lake, maybe 100 yards out. It wasn't bright, not like a spotlight or anything, more like the glow of a candle behind glass, yellowish, flickering a little. We all stood up, thinking maybe it was a boat, but it wasn't moving horizontally. It was rising, slowly, just straight up. No sound, no ripple on the water underneath. I remember that part specifically. The water stayed perfectly still. It was like the light wasn't part of the lake at all, like it wasn't touching anything, just lifting away. Kyle said maybe a drone, but it didn't have that steady motion drones usually have. It wobbled a little as it moved, kind of like a lantern caught in slow wind, even though the air was completely still. You could hear us breathing. It kept going until it was maybe 60 feet up, then just stopped, hovered. We stood there for a long time, watching it. I checked my phone for a signal. Nothing, which wasn't surprising out there. I tried to get a photo, but the screen wouldn't focus. It just showed a black blur. No detail. We stayed out there for at least an hour, maybe more. The light didn't move much. It would drift a few feet to one side, then back again. Sometimes it dimmed almost to nothing, then came back a little brighter. It didn't pulse regularly, though. There wasn't a pattern. It just flickered like something alive. It made you feel like it was watching. Not in a paranoid way, just aware of us. At one point, Meg whispered, "Do you hear that?" And we all went quiet. There was a very faint humming sound, but not electrical. More like when you plug your ears and you can hear your own blood, but external, low and soft. It came and went. You couldn't be sure it was real. Then around midnight, the light started dropping, slowly just like before. No sudden movement. It sank the same way it had risen, hovering down in a wobble until it touched the surface. And then, this is the weirdest part, instead of reflecting off the water, it just disappeared into it, like it was being absorbed. The glow got duller and duller until it was gone, and the lake was pitch black again. No splash, no wave, nothing. We stood there a long time after. None of us said much. Eventually Kyle said he was cold, and we all went back up to the tents. The fire was mostly burned out. We didn't restart it. That night I didn't sleep much. I wasn't scared exactly, just unsettled. I kept listening for the hum or for footsteps or something, but it stayed quiet. Around 3, I got up to pee and stepped out of the tent. The moon was out, almost full. Everything looked normal. But when I looked at the lake, I had this feeling like something was under the surface, just waiting. I don't know where that thought came from. I went back inside fast. In the morning, we didn't talk about it right away. I think we were all waiting for someone to bring it up. Kyle finally said, "That thing was real, right?" And we all kind of nodded. No one had an explanation. We packed up later that afternoon and left earlier than planned. A week later, I went back out by myself, just for the day. I hiked down to that same spot, sat on the rock for a while. The lake looked totally normal. Same light breeze, same calm water, nothing strange. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I shouldn't stay after dark. I left before sunset and haven't been back since. I was out hiking alone in the Blue Ridge Mountains one weekend in late September. I like to get away from the city noise, just wander around with a backpack, some water, and my camera. This time I decided to check out a remote valley trail I'd never been on before. It's one of those spots where the trail is barely marked and the only people you might see are hunters or other hikers, but even they're rare. I started early, around 7 a.m., and the weather was cool but clear. The forest was quiet except for birds and the wind through the leaves. After a few hours, I dropped down into this small valley surrounded by steep hillsides covered in thick underbrush and scattered pines. The sunlight filtered down in patches, and the air smelled like damp earth and pine needles. I liked it, felt untouched. I was hiking along the edge of one hillside when I caught something out of place near a cluster of ferns. At first, I thought it was just some old trash or maybe a piece of discarded gear. But when I got closer, it didn't look like anything normal. It was this small object, about the size of a basketball, embedded partly into the slope. The surface was metallic but oddly smooth and a bit shiny, like aluminum but darker, maybe a dull gray with a slight bluish tint. It reflected the sunlight strangely, but not like polished metal, more like brushed or weathered, except it didn't have any scratches or rust. What really got me was that it looked like it was pressed right into the earth and rock. The ground around it was a bit disturbed, like it had been pushed there with some force. There was no dirt on the surface itself, which was weird because it was wedged in at an angle. I took a few pictures but didn't touch it. It felt wrong to mess with it. I circled around it, trying to figure out what it might be. It didn't look like any kind of equipment or gear I'd ever seen. No wires, no markings, no seams or bolts. Just a smooth, metallic oval shape partly sunk into the hillside. I tried to listen for any sounds. Nothing. No humming, no vibrations, just quiet. The forest seemed oddly still, like the birds had gone silent or stopped moving for a moment. That caught me off guard. I kept checking around, but everything looked normal, except for the stillness. I stayed there maybe 20 minutes, snapping photos and watching. The light shifted as the sun moved behind some clouds, and the object's surface seemed to darken with the shade, but it didn't disappear or change shape. I kept wondering how long it had been there. It didn't look old, but I couldn't imagine anyone bringing something like that out here and just leaving it. Eventually, I decided to head back. I told myself it was probably just some piece of scrap metal or maybe part of an old survey marker or something, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't right. The next day, I went back with my friend Matt. I wanted him to see it too, figure out if maybe I was just imagining things. We got there mid-afternoon after a short hike. When we reached the spot, the hillside looked empty. The metal thing was gone. The ground where it had been was smooth. No signs of disturbance or anything left behind. We searched around, looking for tracks or footprints, anything that might explain it. Nothing. No signs anyone had been there overnight. No tire marks or paths. The dirt looked like it hadn't been touched in a long time. Matt was baffled and said maybe I was seeing things or mixed up the location, but I was sure. I even showed him the pictures I took the day before. The photos were clear enough. The object looked the same, sitting there half buried in the hill. But when we looked back at the spot, it was like it never existed. I even tried to mark the place on my GPS, and the coordinates matched where we stood. Still, the metal shape was gone. We spent the next hour walking the surrounding area trying to find any clue where it might have gone or if it was moved. No luck. The forest was quiet, like the day before. Except this time I noticed something else. A kind of distant, droning sound, low and steady, barely audible, but definitely there. It wasn't wind or traffic, just a soft mechanical hum coming from somewhere uphill. Matt didn't hear it, or at least he said he didn't. I wasn't sure if I was imagining that too. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about that object and how it vanished. It didn't feel like something that just got taken away by a person, and I didn't see any signs of tampering around it. It felt like it was never there, or maybe it wasn't supposed to be there. The next few days, I went back to the valley a couple more times. I tried to find anything unusual, strange lights, noises, movements, but nothing. Just normal woods. No sign of the metallic shape or the weird silence that came with it. I still think about that thing sometimes when I'm out hiking or even just sitting at home. Like there's something out there, something watching or waiting that doesn't belong. And maybe I saw a glimpse of it or a trace of it, but I don't know what exactly. I'm not a person who usually believes in weird stuff. I'm practical. But that thing, whatever it was, didn't fit with anything normal I know. And the fact it disappeared like that, well, I can't explain it. I was out for my usual late-night run, the kind where the streets are mostly empty, except for the occasional car or dog walker. It was just past midnight, a little cooler than usual for early May, and the sky was clear with a handful of stars scattered above. I live on the edge of town, so there's less light pollution, which makes the night sky kind of intense. if you're into that. I'm not really into stargazing or anything. I just like running when the roads are quiet and my mind can clear. I was about 3 miles in, jogging along a stretch of road that runs beside some old farmland. The fields were empty, but the farmhouses scattered around had lights on here and there. My headphones were off because I prefer to run without them when it's this late. I like hearing the world around me, small sounds, my breath, footsteps on the pavement. I glanced up and noticed a single light hovering in the sky. At first, I thought it was a plane. There's an airport about 15 miles east of me, so it's normal to see planes passing over, especially at night. But this light wasn't moving like a plane normally does. It just hung there, stationary. I stopped running for a second and squinted. The light was dim but steady, not blinking like a commercial plane's lights would. After a few seconds, it started to rotate slowly, like it was turning in place. That was the moment it felt weird. I mean, I've never seen a plane just stop midair like that, let alone spin around on the spot. There was no engine noise, either. Nothing. Usually when a plane's nearby at night, you can hear that constant drone, even if it's faint. But this was dead silent. I stood there, frozen, watching it rotate. The light shifted from white to a pale blue, then back again, kind of like those old disco balls, but slower and smoother. I tried to figure out what it was. A drone? Could be, but the size looked bigger than any drone I'd seen, and the smooth rotation didn't make sense. Also, no blinking lights like drones usually have for safety. Then, just as slowly as it had started, the thing stopped rotating and locked in place, hovering maybe 300 feet above the road. I could barely make out a shape, a vague silhouette that was kind of oval or maybe triangular from what little I could see. I'm not good at judging distances in the dark, but it was definitely close enough to be big. Then it moved. It darted away from me in a blink, but not in a straight line. It angled sharply, like a bird banking hard, but way faster. If you've ever seen a plane try to turn, it's usually a wide curve, not this sudden. This thing turned like it was sliding on ice, just twisting its whole body midair and shooting off at an angle I didn't think was possible for any aircraft. It disappeared behind some trees at the end of the road in seconds. I stood there for a moment, trying to process what I'd just seen. I looked around to see if anyone else was out there. Nothing. No cars, no people. Just me and the quiet road. I started running again, but my legs felt heavier and my breathing was off. I checked my phone, no notifications, no missed calls. The time was exactly 12:07 a.m. I kept glancing back toward where the thing disappeared, but nothing came out of the dark. A couple minutes later, I noticed my watch was a minute behind my phone. I figured I'd reset it a while ago and forgot. No big deal. But then, about a mile down the road, my phone screen flickered twice. It was weird. No app open, no calls or texts coming through. Just a quick flicker that's like the display caught a glitch. I slowed down, trying to shake off the feeling of being watched or something. The streetlights flickered too, just for a second. I told myself it was probably just old wiring or a coincidence. But the whole time, I felt like something was lingering nearby, just out of sight. When I got home, I checked my security cameras. Nothing unusual showed up on the front porch footage. No cars, no shadows moving against the driveway. The only strange thing was a faint glow reflected off a tree branch in the corner of the frame around 12:08 a.m., right after the light disappeared. I haven't seen anything like that since. I went back running a few nights later. Same route, same time. Nothing. No weird lights, no silence, no unnatural turns in the sky. Just normal cars passing and dogs barking somewhere down the street. I keep thinking about that light though. How it hovered, rotated silently, then zipped off at a crazy angle. I have no idea what it was, and it bugs me that it didn't make a sound or leave a trace. It wasn't a plane, not a drone, and it sure as hell wasn't a helicopter. I'm not one to jump to conclusions or get spooked by things I can't explain, but that night, it didn't add up. I guess some things just don't. The dog started barking around 3:17 a.m. every single night. Not just once or twice, but like clockwork for a week straight. It was weird because we live out in the country, and usually the dogs don't make a fuss unless there's a raccoon or something rustling through the bushes. But this barking wasn't normal. It was sharp, urgent, almost like the dog was warning us. I'm not the most observant when I'm half asleep, but my son kept waking up, telling us the dog was going crazy outside. We have 2 dogs, but it was always the younger one, Max, doing this. His bark wasn't like a threat, more like confusion or fear. It started to creep me out after a few nights because I'd check the clock every time I heard it, and sure enough, it was always 3:17, give or take a minute or two. On the 3rd night, I got out of bed to see what was going on. I grabbed my phone, turned on the flashlight, and opened the back door slowly. The yard was dark, the moon just a sliver, barely lighting up anything. Max was standing at the edge of the porch, his hackles up, eyes fixed on the far corner of the yard. Nothing was moving, but he wouldn't stop barking. I stepped out, calling his name softly, trying to get him to calm down. Then I noticed something odd. The air felt different. Not cold, but heavy, like the quiet before a storm. The usual sounds of the night, crickets, the rustle of leaves, distant frogs, all seemed to drop away. It was dead silent, except for Max's barking. I didn't see anything, but the feeling wouldn't go away, so I went back inside and locked the door behind me. I told my wife about it the next day, but she brushed it off, said dogs sometimes get spooked by things we don't notice. Fair enough. The next night, same thing. Max barking at exactly 3:17. This time, my wife and I decided to check the security cameras we'd installed a few months ago after a string of break-ins in the neighborhood. We figured maybe there was someone lurking around or a wild animal close by. We rewound the footage to the time of the barking. The video showed the yard clearly, the porch light casting long shadows over the grass. But then something really strange happened. Right when Max started barking, the screen flickered with static for a split second. Nothing unusual there, cameras sometimes glitch, but when the image cleared, Max was gone. No dog in the yard at all, just empty grass and shadows. I rewound it and played it over and over. Max had been inside earlier, and the timestamp was right. We heard him barking, but the camera showed no sign of him stepping outside. The footage right before and right after that glitch showed the yard empty. The glitch lasted less than 2 seconds, but it was enough to erase Max from the video completely. I checked the other cameras around the house, but none of them caught anything unusual. Just a weird static glitch on the one facing the backyard. I showed it to a friend who's into tech, but he said it could be a minor camera malfunction, nothing to worry about. But it wasn't just the glitch. Over the next few nights, the barking got different. Sometimes Max would stop suddenly, fetter, like he saw something just at the edge of the yard, and then it disappeared. Other times, he'd stare straight into the darkness without moving his head, just locked on one spot, his body tense, tail stiff. One night, I stayed awake, watching the security feed live on my phone. At exactly 3:17, Max started barking again. I looked out the window at the yard. Still dark, still empty. The camera feed went blurry, static blooming across the screen for a few seconds. When it cleared, Max was gone. But I was watching the porch with my own eyes, and he was standing there, fur bristled, looking out. I felt my stomach twist. How could the camera not see him when I was right there? I blinked, thinking maybe my eyes were playing tricks. Then I noticed something else, a faint, pale glow near the far corner of the yard, barely visible through the bushes. It was dim, like the light of a cell phone screen, but without any shape or source. The light pulsed slowly, almost like it was breathing. Max barked at the glow, but then the light vanished. Max stopped barking immediately, his whole body relaxing as if whatever was there was gone. I kept staring into the dark, but it was empty again. I went outside after a few minutes to check. Nothing. No light, no footprints, no broken branches. After that night, Max's barking stopped completely. It was like nothing had ever happened. He acted normal, happy, back to chasing squirrels during the day. I kept checking the cameras, hoping to see that glitch again, or the light, but the footage was normal. No static, no missing dog, just ordinary nights. I still don't know what was there in the yard, something I couldn't see or catch on camera. Something that made my dog bark like he did, but vanished when we tried to prove it was real. That's the part that gets me. How can something be so present and then disappear like it was never there? I was coming in for the last pass of the day, just finishing up spraying the far edge of the wheat field before heading back to the barn. The sun was low, just starting to dip behind the hills, so the light was golden and long, everything looking warmer and a bit softer than usual. It was the kind of evening where you almost don't want to stop flying. I'd done the field 3 or 4 times that afternoon, nothing unusual. The plane was steady, the spray system working fine, and the only sound was the drone of the engine and the wind. My routine was tight: line up low, keep the speed steady, spray, then climb out, turn around, and start again. I was halfway through the pass when something shifted. I was maybe 50 feet above the wheat, eyes scanning the ground to make sure the coverage was even, when I noticed this weird shimmer across the field below, like heat waves on asphalt, but cooler, not the usual heat distortion. The wheat stalks looked bent, like a ripple moving through the crops, but there was no wind. The air was still, quiet except for the engine. It moved fast, gliding beneath me from one side of the field to the other, like a wave that folded the wheat down, then lifted it back up. I couldn't see a shape, no shadow or outline, just the effect it had on the plants. The ground looked like it was breathing or shifting under the surface. It was huge, way bigger than any animal or machine I knew of. Way bigger than a truck or a tractor, for sure. I banked a little to get a better look, but the distortion moved with me, staying just out of sight, sliding beneath the field like something massive passing just under the surface. No sound. Nothing except the wheat bending in slow waves, folding and unfolding. I checked my altimeter. Steady, no turbulence. The plane was steady, but my heart started racing. This wasn't normal. I pulled up slightly, trying to get above it, but the shimmer didn't go away. It just kept moving, drifting slowly toward the east edge of the field. I couldn't tell how deep it was, or even if it was underwater. There wasn't any water nearby, just dirt and crops. Then the whole field kind of flickered, like the distortion hit a wall or an edge. The wheat snapped back upright all at once, like someone flipped a switch. The wave was gone, no ripple, no shimmer, just the regular golden stalks stretching out under the fading light. I circled around, looking for any sign of what I'd just seen. No tracks, no machinery, no animals. Nothing that could have made that kind of movement without noise or visible shape. I scanned the horizon. Clear sky, no clouds, no birds, no drones or other planes. The radio was dead quiet. I thought about calling the farm, telling someone what I'd seen, but the words felt stupid. What would I even say? Hey! Something big passed under my plane, but I couldn't see it. It sounded crazy even in my head. I finished the pass, a little shaken, then headed back to land. The wheat field looked normal, peaceful, like nothing had happened. I checked my phone when I got out. No missed calls, no messages. The sun was gone, replaced by the cold blue of early evening. That night, I kept replaying what I'd seen. The way the wheat bent, the slow pulse of the distortion, the silence. I thought maybe it was a trick of the light, or a weird heat mirage, but it didn't fit. I've been flying crops for years. I've seen all kinds of strange weather and odd reflections, but nothing like this. The next day I went back to the field with a couple of the farmhands. We walked the area where the distortion had passed. No tracks, no broken stalks, no signs that anything heavy had moved through there recently. The dirt was dry and hard, no disturbance. A week later, I flew the same field again, same time of day. The wheat was taller now, waving in the breeze like usual. I kept an eye out for anything odd but saw nothing. No shimmer, no waves, no ripples. Sometimes I wonder if I imagined the whole thing, but I know what I saw. Something massive moving beneath the surface, invisible except for the way it changed the wheat. I don't know what it was, and I'm not sure I want to. But it was real enough to throw off my landing and make me feel like I was flying over something I wasn't supposed to see. I was driving home late one night through the mountain pass. It was one of those thick fog nights where everything feels quieter, like the world's been wrapped up in cotton. I'd left a friend's place pretty late, maybe around midnight, and the roads were empty except for me. The fog had been creeping in for a while, first just a little mist, then it got thicker the farther up the road I went. The pass is this winding stretch with steep cliffs on one side and dense trees on the other. There aren't many streetlights, just the occasional reflector post along the guardrail. I was doing about 40, careful with the slick road and low visibility. The fog made everything blurry and muted. Sounds were dull, headlights looked like fuzzy halos, and the trees all around looked like shadows. I remember the first weird thing was the headlights. I was coming around a bend and saw a pair of bright lights up ahead, just sitting there. At first, I thought it was a car stopped on the side, maybe someone broken down or pulled over. But the more I looked, the less it made sense. The headlights were about 50 feet off the ground. They were just hanging there. No body of a car underneath or around them. No tires, no outline, nothing. I slowed down, squinting through the fog, trying to figure out what I was seeing. The lights stayed perfectly still, not blinking or moving, just hovering maybe 100 feet ahead and definitely off the road. They were too high up to be normal headlights. They were just floating. I blinked a few times and adjusted my rearview mirror to check behind me. No other cars, no follow lights. Just my truck's dim taillights, disappearing into the fog behind. I kept driving, slow and steady, but the headlights stayed there, just floating in the fog like some weird street decoration someone had put up. I wasn't thinking about aliens or anything like that, just how odd and out of place it was. As I got closer, the fog seemed thicker around the lights. The air felt heavier. The lights flickered a little, not like a bulb going out, more like a pulse. They dimmed and brightened rhythmically, slow and even. I caught my breath, realizing this wasn't normal at all. I glanced down at the dashboard and noticed my phone had lost signal. No bars, no notifications, nothing. I tried to call my friend back, but the call didn't connect. It was like the fog was swallowing all signals too. I passed under the lights slowly, keeping my eyes on the road, but feeling like I was being watched. The temperature dropped suddenly, and the truck's heater struggled against the chill. My hands tightened on the steering wheel. The lights stayed above me for maybe a minute. I'm not sure how long. It felt like forever and no time at all. When I finally looked up through the windshield, I saw the headlights fade out all at once, just gone. No flicker, no fade, just nothing. Right after, the fog thinned and the normal yellow streetlights down the road flickered back on. The air warmed up a bit. I looked in the rearview mirror again, but there was nothing behind me. No floating lights, no cars. I kept driving, but the feeling didn't leave me. The silence was too quiet, like the world was holding its breath. Every time I glanced at the spot where the lights had been, I half expected them to pop back into view. Once I got down to the valley and the fog cleared, the radio buzzed back to life. My phone started picking up signal again. Nothing else happened on the drive home. The roads were just roads, the trees just trees. I still think about those lights sometimes. What I saw or thought I saw. There's no clear explanation, no car, no reflection, no wires, just headlights floating in the fog, totally detached from anything real. It didn't chase me or do anything, just hung there, watching. I drove that pass a few times since then, late at night, but I haven't seen anything like that again. I worked the night shift at this small weather station out in the Tundra for about 2 weeks during the late fall. The place is pretty isolated, just a couple of buildings, some antennas, solar panels, and a few cameras set up to monitor the surroundings. It's so remote that the nearest town is hours away and cell service is spotty at best. My job was mostly checking instruments, logging data, and keeping an eye on the equipment through the security cameras. One night, around 2 a.m., I was doing my usual rounds, flipping between camera feeds on the monitor in the main room. The wind was howling outside, making the temperature feel even colder. Snow had started falling lightly earlier, but it was patchy on the ground, still more dirt and frozen grass than actual snow cover. That's when I noticed something on the northwest camera. This one faces the open tundra, just miles of flat, barren land stretching out to the horizon. There was a figure walking slowly across the landscape. At first I thought maybe it was a hunter or some kind of worker out there, but the figure didn't look quite right. It was humanoid, but the shape was strange, too tall maybe, and the way it moved wasn't quite natural. It didn't have the usual bounciness or rhythm you'd expect from someone walking. It almost seemed like it was gliding or floating a little above the ground. The weirdest thing was the way it appeared on the footage. The camera's motion sensor was set to record in short bursts whenever something moved. But this figure showed up with these long, flickering gaps between frames, like the camera was struggling to capture it properly. For a second, it was there, then gone for a few frames, then back, flickering in and out. I started rewinding, playing the clip again, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The silhouette was dark against the gray tundra, no distinct features, but the head looked slightly elongated. It kept moving in a straight line toward the south. The whole scene was eerie, not just because of the figure, but the way the tundra around it looked slightly distorted, like the air was shimmering. I checked the camera settings to make sure it wasn't a glitch or interference. Everything was normal. The feed wasn't choppy anywhere else, just this spot where the figure appeared. I even rebooted the system, but the recording stayed the same. I didn't want to believe what my eyes were showing, so I called the other guy on the shift to watch the footage with me. He was halfway asleep, but even he agreed it looked strange. He said maybe it was some kind of animal or someone messing with the camera, but neither of us could explain the flickering or the shape. After a while, the figure disappeared beyond the range of the camera. I looked outside through the window, but the tundra was empty, quiet, except for the wind. No footprints or signs anyone had been there recently. Over the next couple of nights, I kept checking that camera, hoping to catch something again, or maybe find an explanation. Nothing showed up, but every time I played back the footage from that night, the flickering gaps and the shape still gave me a weird feeling. I didn't mention it to anyone else, and when I finished my shift and left, I told myself it was probably just a trick of the light or a technical glitch. But that figure, sliding across the tundra like it didn't belong, stuck with me. I'm still not sure what I saw, but I know it wasn't just a man or an animal. Something about it felt off. I was working the night shift at this remote communications outpost out in the middle of nowhere, way up in the mountains where there's barely any light pollution. My job was mostly maintenance, checking signal equipment, and just keeping an eye on the place overnight. Usually it was pretty boring, but sometimes the isolation gets to you. That night, I stepped outside around midnight to take a break. The sky was clear and full of stars. At least that's what I thought at first. I looked up, just standing there with my coffee, when I noticed something odd. The stars weren't steady. They started to move, slowly at first, like the whole sky was spinning. I blinked, thinking maybe my eyes were messing with me, or I was just tired. I stared longer, trying to focus, and the movement kept going. The stars were rotating around some invisible center, and it was weirdly hypnotic. I pulled out my phone to check the time and maybe take a picture, but the screen's light suddenly felt too bright compared to the dark sky. That's when I realized it wasn't the stars moving at all. Something massive was slowly shifting in front of the sky. I couldn't see the edges clearly. It was just this enormous dark shape blotting out the stars as it moved. No lights, no noise. It wasn't like a plane or a satellite or anything I'd ever seen. I stood frozen, watching it glide silently overhead, covering more and more of the sky. The way it moved didn't feel natural either. It was smooth but deliberate, like it was aware it was being seen. I tried to call out, but my voice caught in my throat. The wind picked up, but there was no sound coming from the shape itself. I kept looking around, half expecting to see some lights from a nearby town or other workers coming out, but I was alone. The outpost was a few miles away from anything else, so no one could have missed this. As the shape passed over, the stars behind it vanished. For a moment, the sky was just an empty blackness with no stars at all, and it felt like the air got heavier, like something was pressing down. I could see my breath, and my hands started shaking. I tried to pull out my phone again, but the screen stayed blank, like the shape was blocking any signal or electronic interference. I put the phone away, not sure if it was worth trying to record something that probably wouldn't save properly anyway. It passed overhead, moving slowly, and then, just as quietly as it came, it drifted away, letting the stars come back into view. The spinning stopped, and the sky looked normal again. but I knew it wasn't normal. I went back inside and checked the security cameras around the outpost, hoping to see the shape on one of them, but the feeds all looked fine. No shadows, no moving dark shapes, just the usual empty landscape under the starry sky. I stayed inside the rest of the night, watching the sky through the window. Nothing else happened. When my shift ended, I packed up and left without saying much. I didn't know how to explain what I'd seen without sounding crazy. Even now, I'm not sure what it was. It wasn't an airplane or a drone. It didn't make a sound. The stars didn't move themselves. Something huge just drifted overhead, blocking the sky, and then vanished. I haven't gone back to that outpost since. I've been hiking alone for years. It's my thing, really. The quiet of the woods, the solitude of a long trek, far from the noise of city life, nothing beats it. That's what made me take the trip to the park that day. It wasn't my first time there, and I was looking forward to a long, peaceful walk along the river trail. But I can't explain it. Something felt different about that day. The weather had been odd that morning. There was a strange stillness in the air. But I didn't think much of it. It wasn't until I was well into my hike, just past the old trail markers, that the feeling started to settle in. It wasn't just the air, it was the whole place. The trees seemed quieter than usual. Even the river seemed to be running slower, almost as if the forest itself was holding its breath. I had been walking for a few hours when I reached a part of the trail I hadn't seen before. The path veered down to a small, secluded part of the riverbank where the trees crowded in closer and everything felt a little more enclosed. The water was clear, the kind of clear you don't see in many places. It was a spot I would have passed by without thinking, but something drew me closer. Maybe it was the perfect spot to sit down and rest for a while. I'd barely taken a few steps toward the river when I noticed something strange. There was a figure sitting at the water's edge, just ahead of me. At first, I thought it was someone else, another hiker, maybe someone who had taken the same trail, but the closer I got, the more I realized how wrong I was. This person wasn't human. It was sitting still, almost like it was waiting for something, just watching the river. At first, I couldn't make out any details. It was like a silhouette blurred by the trees and the shadows. But as I got closer, everything about it started to become clearer. It wasn't like anything I had ever seen. The figure was tall, though not in a way that felt unnatural. Its posture was rigid but calm. It was sitting cross-legged by the riverbank, staring at the water in front of it. I couldn't see its face clearly, but there was something about it that made the hairs on my neck stand up. The way the figure was dressed, or rather how its body seemed to be covered, wasn't fabric or any material I could recognize. It shimmered, like the light was bending around it. It almost looked like the figure was part of the landscape itself, blending in with the surroundings. I stopped dead in my tracks. For a moment, I thought about turning around and heading back down the trail, but my legs wouldn't move. I just stood there, staring at it. I knew it was wrong to stare, but I couldn't look away. My mind raced, wondering what I was looking at, but a strange calmness washed over me, almost like I was being hypnotized by the stillness of the scene. And then it did something. The figure, this thing, moved its head. Not like it had just noticed me, but more like it was acknowledging my presence. I froze, my heart racing in my chest. The air felt thick, heavy, like I was holding my breath without realizing it. That's when it happened. The thing, it spoke to me. Not with words, not out loud, but in my mind. A presence, an understanding. It was like it had been waiting for me to approach, like it knew I was coming. I could hear its thoughts, or at least I could feel them. They weren't human thoughts, but somehow they felt familiar, like the way you can just tell when someone is staring at you, even if you can't see them. It didn't speak in any language I could understand, but it didn't need to. The message was simple and unmistakable. Something is coming. I stood there, utterly still, as the sense of urgency washed over me. The figure didn't move, but the message grew stronger in my mind. It wasn't a warning in the way we usually think of warnings. There wasn't any fear in it, no panic. It wasn't threatening. It was just a fact, a statement, like telling someone it's going to rain. And then, without another movement, the figure turned its gaze back to the river. I didn't know what to do, what to say, or even how to feel. Part of me wanted to ask what it meant, but I knew I wasn't supposed to. I wasn't supposed to speak. I just had to understand what it had told me. Before I could take another step, it happened again. Only this time, I didn't hear it in my mind. I felt it. The ground beneath me trembled, just slightly, like something far off was shifting. The air grew thick again, this time colder, heavier. It felt like the world was holding its breath, just like the forest had been earlier that morning. The figure's presence faded, and I felt a strange pull in my chest. It wasn't physical, but it felt like I was being gently tugged, like the earth itself was trying to get my attention. The figure was still there, but I knew it was time to leave. Something was coming. I turned and walked away from the riverbank, but I didn't want to take my eyes off the creature. I couldn't explain it, but I knew it wasn't a being from this world. It wasn't human. It wasn't like anything I'd ever read about, not in science fiction or in the folklore I had learned over the years. But I also knew that it wasn't dangerous. It didn't want to hurt me. It had only wanted to share its warning, and now that it had, it was done. As I walked back down the trail, my mind was racing. What had it meant? What was coming? I didn't know, but there was a quiet certainty that I couldn't shake. There was no urgency in its words, no panic, but the message was unmistakable. Something was coming. When I finally made it back to the main trail, I looked over my shoulder, half expecting to see the figure still sitting there, but it was gone. The forest was calm again, the air lighter. It was like nothing had ever happened. But I knew something was wrong. I didn't know how I knew, but I knew. I don't know if anyone else would have believed me if I'd told them about it. I don't know if anyone would have understood. But that night I couldn't sleep. The message kept echoing in my mind. Something was coming. The next day I found out. The local news reported it. A landslide in the nearby mountains, a massive one. A whole section of the trail had been wiped out. The damage was extensive. No one was hurt, thank God, but the destruction was worse than anything anyone had anticipated. I don't know if the creature was warning me about the landslide or if it was something else entirely. I'm not sure what it meant when it said, something is coming, but I don't think it was just about the landslide. It didn't feel like just an ordinary disaster. I haven't been back to that trail since. I don't think I'll go back. Maybe I was meant to see that creature. Maybe I wasn't. But I'll never forget the look in its eyes or the message it gave me. Something was coming. And whatever it was, I wasn't ready for it. I had always gone night fishing on the lake. It's something I've done for as long as I can remember, and there's a peace to it, especially when you're alone on the water under the stars. I was never the kind of person to get spooked easily, but this night, it was different. It was about 2 years ago, early in the summer. I had the whole lake to myself, no other boats out there, just the soft lapping of water against the hull and the occasional splash of a fish breaking the surface. I don't usually stay out this late, but the fishing had been good, and I figured I'd push it a little longer before heading back. The moon was full, casting silver streaks across the water, and the air had that crisp coolness that only comes at night by a lake. I had my lantern beside me and a radio playing softly. The only sounds I could hear were the croaking of frogs and the occasional hoot of an owl. Nothing unusual about it. Nothing at all. It was just after midnight when I started to feel a little off. I couldn't explain why. It wasn't the usual quiet calm that I was used to. It was like something was pressing on the edges of my thoughts. I tried to shake it off, telling myself I was just tired, but then I heard something that made me freeze. At first, it was just a soft hum, almost like a distant engine or maybe a boat far away, but there was something off about it. It wasn't the usual sound you'd hear on the lake. This wasn't a sound you could place, not one you could even recognize. It didn't seem to be coming from any direction either. It was just there, filling the air, vibrating through the water. I looked around, trying to spot anything unusual. The fog had started to roll in from the shore, creeping in thick tendrils, but there was still enough light from the moon to see the immediate area. Nothing. I figured it was just my imagination and went back to fishing, but the hum wouldn't stop. It got louder, more constant, and that's when I saw them. At first, it was just a couple of faint lights, small, round, like lanterns, but they were floating on the surface of the water, and there was no way to explain them. They weren't boats or reflections. I thought maybe I was seeing things, or maybe there were some other fishermen out there with strange lights. But no. I stared harder. The lights were hovering just above the water, moving slowly around my boat in a perfect circle. At first, I thought they were fireflies or something similar, but they were too steady, too intentional. They didn't flicker or fly erratically like insects. They moved as though they were being controlled, and the closer I looked, the stranger they seemed. There were 3 of them, then 4, then 5, each one floating in a small arc around me just above the surface. They didn't make a sound, just hovered, their lights glowing a soft blue that cut through the mist. My heart started to race. I tried to tell myself they were just some sort of natural phenomenon, maybe some kind of bioluminescent algae or something, but deep down, I knew that wasn't it. These things were too deliberate. I reached for my flashlight, wanting to get a better look, but when I flicked it on, it did nothing. The beam didn't even cut through the fog like it usually did. It was as if the light wasn't allowed to reach them. The orbs just continued floating, moving slowly in their silent, calculated pattern. A cold shiver ran down my spine, and that's when I realized I wasn't alone. They weren't just floating above the water. They were studying it, watching it. The way they moved, the way they rotated around me, it was as if they were mapping something far beyond what I could understand. One of the orbs dipped lower, close enough that I could almost feel the air around it shift. It wasn't close enough to touch, but I felt a strange pressure, like the atmosphere was changing. Then, in an instant, it darted back up into the air, and I swear the air felt thicker. The hum I'd been hearing grew louder again, like something deep beneath the water had just awakened. It wasn't the water itself, but something below it. Something that had been there for longer than I'd realized. I'm not proud of how fast my heart started to pound, but I wasn't about to sit there and wait for whatever these things were to show their full hand. I started pulling in my fishing line, trying to act normal, trying to ignore the fear gnawing at the pit of my stomach. I told myself, just get the gear in, get the boat turned around, and leave. But the orbs were faster than I could react. They moved in closer, surrounding my boat now, and I could see them more clearly. They weren't like any lights I'd seen before. They didn't just glow, they pulsed rhythmically, and as I watched them, the hairs on my neck stood up. They weren't just lights. They were something more, like probes, tiny hovering devices that were more alive than I had ever expected anything from the water to be. It was then that I saw it, just beneath the surface of the water, barely visible under the moon's light. Something massive was moving. I could see the faint outline of a shape, like a shadow deep in the lake, undulating and shifting. The orbs seemed to react to it, as if they were communicating with whatever was down there. They'd dart toward the surface of the water, circle around for a moment, then move back. It was like they were studying the movement, the behavior, and the flow of whatever lay beneath. I didn't want to stick around to find out what it was. Without thinking, I grabbed my paddle and started pushing the boat forward. My hands were shaking, my mind racing with everything I had just seen. The orbs followed, their lights bobbing and shifting as they continued their silent surveillance. It was like they were never going to leave. But then, just as suddenly as they had appeared, the orbs started to pull away. One by one, they drifted back into the fog, further and further until they were swallowed up by the mist. The hum started to fade with them, and just like that, the night was quiet again. My boat felt lighter. The weight of their presence lifted, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something had just been set in motion, something bigger than me or anything I could understand. I didn't look back after that. I rowed as fast as I could, heading straight for the shore, the paddles cutting through the water with urgency. When I finally made it back to the dock, I didn't even bother to unload my gear. I just wanted to get off the lake. The next day, I went back to the spot, but there was nothing. No orbs, no strange hum. The water was calm, the air was still. It was like the whole thing had never happened. But I knew what I saw. I knew what I felt. Those things, they weren't of this world, and I wasn't supposed to see them. but I did. And now, every time I go back to that lake, I can't shake the feeling that they're still out there, watching, waiting. I don't fish at night anymore, and I haven't told anyone else what I saw. I don't think they'd believe me. But I know what happened, and I know that something out there in the dark water is being watched. It was studying the lake, and I was just a tiny part of it. It all started when I went to the lake with a few friends for a weekend trip. We had all agreed on going to the park for a couple of days to get away from everything and just relax. It had been a while since I had been to that lake, but it was always one of my favorite places to go. The water was clear, the air was fresh, and the peacefulness of it all just made you forget about everything else. But that weekend, something changed. It was a Saturday afternoon when I first noticed it. We were lounging by the shore, soaking in the sun and chatting, when I saw it, a strange, soft glow coming from the lake. At first, I thought it was just the light reflecting off the water in a way I hadn't seen before. But as I looked more closely, I realized it wasn't the sunlight. It wasn't anything natural. The water had taken on this eerie, pale blue glow. It wasn't bright or flashy, but it was enough to catch your attention. I wasn't the only one who noticed. My friends started looking at it too. Jenna, one of my friends, stood up and pointed. "Is that normal?" she asked. None of us had ever seen anything like it. We didn't really think much of it at first. We all just assumed it was some kind of optical illusion or something. Maybe algae or minerals in the water were reacting to the sun in a strange way. After all, we were all familiar with this lake, and it never did anything like that before. But we weren't exactly experts on lakes or anything. After a few minutes of talking about it, we decided to just go for a swim. It wasn't too cold, and the glow was kind of mesmerizing. At least it didn't seem harmful, so we didn't think twice about it. I remember stepping into the water and feeling an immediate change in the atmosphere, but I couldn't quite place it. The air felt thicker, almost like the world around us was pressing in just a little more than usual. But at the same time, I felt oddly calm. The first thing I noticed was the way the water felt. It was warm. Not in the way the sun warms a pool, but in a way that almost seemed to come from within the water itself, like the lake was radiating heat, even though it wasn't hot outside. My body felt weightless as I swam. It wasn't a normal feeling. Normally, you'd feel the effort of swimming, the resistance of the water. But in that lake, it was as if the water was holding you up without trying. It felt too easy. I wasn't the only one who noticed this. Everyone else seemed to experience the same thing. We swam around, just floating, hardly moving, and the further we went into the water, the more intense the feeling became. It was like every muscle in my body was completely relaxed, but my mind was clear too. Like I was both awake and asleep at the same time. It was almost hypnotic. It was peaceful, but unsettling at the same time. At one point, I looked over at Jenna, who was floating beside me, and she looked like she was in a trance. She was just staring at the surface of the water, her eyes wide, almost too wide. "Are you okay?" I asked. But she didn't answer. She didn't even seem to hear me. I tried again, this time shaking her shoulder, but she just blinked slowly, like waking up from a dream. She turned to me, and her expression was blank, almost vacant. She didn't say anything, just nodded slowly, like she didn't know what had happened. I was starting to feel uneasy, but I couldn't shake off that strange, calm feeling. I looked around, and it seemed like all of us were acting the same way. We weren't swimming or playing around like we usually would. It was like we were all entranced, just floating in the lake, drifting without any care for time or the world outside. I tried to push the thought out of my head, but something told me that this wasn't right. That's when I noticed something else. The glow in the water wasn't just coming from the surface anymore. It was coming from beneath. The deeper parts of the lake were glowing brighter now, and I could see shapes moving beneath the surface, large shapes. The water around us seemed to hum, a low, vibrating sound that I felt deep in my chest. It wasn't loud, but it was there. It was almost like the lake itself was alive, breathing. "Do you guys hear that?" I asked, but no one responded. They were all still floating, staring at the water. I swam closer to the shore to try to get some distance from whatever was happening, but it felt like the water was pulling me back in. Every stroke I made seemed to take more effort, and the deeper I swam, the stronger the pull became. It was like the didn't want me to leave. That's when I saw it. Just beneath the surface, maybe 10 feet down, there was something large and round. It looked like a stone at first, but as I got closer, I saw that it wasn't. It was some kind of object, smooth and dark, with faint swirling patterns on its surface. It was glowing faintly, pulsing like it was alive. As I stared at it, I realized it was communicating somehow. Not through light or sound, but through the very water itself. I could feel it in my bones, in my head, a presence, like something was trying to speak to me. That's when I snapped out of it. It was like I suddenly realized what was happening. The calmness was gone, replaced by this overwhelming sense of dread. I needed to get out of the water. I didn't know what that thing was, but I knew it wasn't supposed to be there. I called to the others, but they didn't hear me. They were still floating, still staring at the surface of the lake. I swam back to them as fast as I could, but the pull from the lake was stronger now. It was almost like I was swimming through tar. My arms were heavy and my legs felt like lead. It took everything I had just to make it back to the shore. I pulled myself out of the water and turned to look back. That's when I saw it. Jenna was still in the water, but now she wasn't floating. She was sinking. Slowly, like the water was pulling her under. I screamed her name, but she didn't respond. She wasn't even moving. I had to do something. I didn't care if the lake was pulling me back in. I wasn't about to let her drown. I ran into the water, ignoring the strange heavy feeling in my chest. I grabbed her arm and pulled with all my strength, but it felt like I was trying to pull her out of quicksand. The water had a grip on her, pulling her deeper. I couldn't do it alone. I yelled for Mike and Ethan, and they finally snapped out of whatever trance they were in. They rushed over, and together, we pulled Jenna out of the water. As soon as she was on the shore, the pull stopped. The glow in the lake dimmed, and the humming sound faded. We all stood there, panting, looking at the water. The lake was still, peaceful again, but there was no denying what had just happened. We didn't know what that thing was or why it had tried to pull us under, but we knew we couldn't stay. We packed up as quickly as we could and left the lake behind. To this day, I don't know what we encountered that night. Maybe it was some kind of alien organism or maybe something else entirely. But I do know this. I'll never go near that lake again. It started as a normal camping trip. There were 4 of us. Me, my brother Ethan, and 2 of our friends, Mike and Jenna. We picked this spot deep in the woods because it was supposed to have the clearest skies for stargazing. None of us were experts or anything, but we liked looking at the stars, and it was a good excuse to get away from the city. The first night was uneventful. We set up camp, made a fire, and stayed up late talking. The sky was as clear as promised. You could see everything, more stars than I had ever noticed before. We even saw a few shooting stars. It felt peaceful. The second night, things started to feel different. It was subtle at first. The air got colder, even though the forecast said it would stay warm. The woods around us got quieter too. No wind, no insects, no rustling leaves, just silence, except for us. It was like everything around us was holding its breath. We ignored it at first. We were sitting around the fire when Mike pointed out something weird about the sky. He said it looked like it was moving. At first, I thought he was just imagining things, but then we all saw it. The stars weren't where they had been the night before. They were shifting like ripples in a pond after you throw a rock in. Ethan said it was probably just some kind of atmospheric phenomenon like heat waves or auroras, but it didn't feel natural. The stars didn't just distort, they moved, bending and twisting, like someone was stirring them. Jenna thought it was amazing and wanted to take pictures, but her phone wouldn't turn on. None of our electronics worked. Even the flashlight flickered and went out. The fire started acting weird too. The flames stretched upward like they were being pulled and then froze. They didn't flicker or move, just held still, frozen mid-dance. The light stayed the same, but it didn't feel warm anymore. We were all staring at it, too stunned to say anything, when the ground started vibrating. It wasn't an earthquake. It was too rhythmic, like a heartbeat, slow and steady. We could feel it through the soles of our shoes, but nothing around us was shaking. The trees stood perfectly still, and the ground didn't crack or shift. It was just that steady, unnatural thrum. Jenna was the first to speak. She said she felt dizzy, like the ground wasn't solid anymore. Mike agreed, and I started to notice it too. It felt like we were standing on something that wasn't quite there, like the forest had turned into a picture of itself and we were standing inside it. Everything looked the same, but it didn't feel real. Then the sky above us split open. I don't know how else to describe it. One moment it was just rippling, and the next it peeled back, like someone was unzipping the night. Behind it was something else. Not space, not more stars, just a blank, endless void. It wasn't black or white. It didn't have a color at all. It was just nothing. We couldn't move. We couldn't look away. The stars we had been staring at were gone, replaced by this empty, endless void. And then something came through it. It wasn't a ship. Not in the way you think of ships anyway. It was like a massive, floating shape made of light and shadow, constantly shifting. It didn't have a fixed form. One moment it looked like a sphere. The next, it stretched into something like a spiral or a tower. It wasn't solid, but it wasn't see-through either. It was just there, hovering silently above us. The vibrations in the ground stopped, but now we could hear something. A low hum so deep it felt like it was inside us, vibrating in our bones. It wasn't just a sound, it was a feeling, like pressure, like the air was too thick to breathe. Mike tried to say something, but no sound came out. He looked terrified, and so did the rest of us. Then the bubble appeared. I don't know when it started, but suddenly we were surrounded by a faint shimmer in the air, like heat waves rising off pavement. It formed a dome around us, enclosing our campsite and part of the forest. Beyond it, everything was distorted, like looking through a warped lens. The trees outside bent and stretched, and the ground looked like it was tilting away from us. Inside the bubble, time felt strange. The fire was still frozen, but the light didn't seem to fade or flicker. The hum grew louder, and we started seeing flashes of light in the air, like tiny sparks that disappeared as quickly as they appeared. The floating shape in the sky didn't move closer, but it didn't go away either. It just hung there, shifting and changing. Then beams of light shot down from it. They weren't like searchlights or lasers. They were soft, almost misty, but they moved with purpose, scanning the ground. One of them swept over our campsite, and I swear for a second I couldn't feel my body. It was like I was weightless, floating, but still standing in the same spot. When the light passed, the hum faded, and the shimmering dome around us began to collapse. It didn't vanish all at once. It shrank, pulling inward toward the floating shape above. As it did, the frozen fire flickered back to life, and the woods outside returned to normal. We could hear the wind again, and the cold air started to feel natural. When the dome was gone, the shape in the sky pulsed once, like it was taking a breath, and then it slipped back through the rip in the sky. The void closed behind it, sealing up like it had never been there. The stars snapped back into place, and the night was normal again. None of us said a word. We just sat there, staring at the fire, trying to process what had happened. When we finally spoke, we couldn't agree on what we'd seen. Jenna thought it was some kind of advanced technology. Mike thought it was a natural phenomenon we didn't understand. Ethan refused to talk about it at all. We packed up and left at first light. None of us wanted to stay another night in that place. Even now, I don't know what it was. I don't think I'll ever know. But sometimes when I look at the night sky, I wonder if it's still out there, watching, waiting for the right moment to come back. It started as a routine trip, nothing special. I was working in a remote reserve, deep in a forest that felt like it had been untouched for centuries. My job was straightforward: catalog species, take soil samples, and make notes on the health of the ecosystem. It wasn't glamorous, but I loved the solitude. The forest felt alive in a way most places didn't anymore. The tree caught my attention because of its size. It was enormous, easily the oldest thing in the area. Its trunk was wide enough to fit a small car, and the bark was thick and gnarled, covered in moss and fungi. The roots spread out like a massive network, some disappearing into the soil while others twisted above ground like thick, muscular veins. I'd seen old trees before, but this one felt different. It had a presence, like it was watching everything around it. I was setting up my equipment near the tree when I felt it, a faint vibration under my feet. At first, I thought it was something normal, maybe the wind shifting the branches or animals moving underground. But the air was still and the vibrations weren't random. They had a rhythm, almost like a heartbeat, soft but steady. I crouched down, pressing my palm to one of the exposed roots. The vibration was stronger there, and it wasn't just a single pulse. It felt layered, like there were multiple rhythms overlapping. I'd never felt anything like it. I tried to tell myself it was probably some natural phenomenon, maybe water moving through the ground or seismic activity, but it didn't sit right. I spent hours around that tree, trying to figure it out. I took soil samples, recorded the vibrations with my phone, even used a basic seismometer I'd brought along. The readings were strange. The patterns didn't match anything geological, and they didn't seem to come from the tree itself. It was like they were coming from deep below it, far beneath the roots. I decided to dig. I didn't have proper tools for a deep excavation, just a small trowel in my hands. The soil was dense and packed with roots, making it slow work. As I dug, the vibrations grew stronger, enough to make my fingers tingle. The deeper I went, the more I felt like I was uncovering something I wasn't supposed to find. About a foot down, I hit something solid. It wasn't a rock. The surface was smooth and cold, metallic, but not like any metal I'd seen before. It had a faint sheen, almost like it was glowing, though there was no light source. I cleared more soil away, revealing a rounded surface that curved downward into the earth. It was big, far bigger than I could uncover on my own. I sat back, staring at it. My chest felt tight, like I was holding my breath without meaning to. The vibrations were constant now, thrumming through the metal and into my body. It felt alive, not like an organism, but like a machine that was aware of me. I didn't want to touch it, but I couldn't stop myself. I pressed my palm to the surface, and everything went still. The forest was silent. No wind, no birds, not even the rustling of leaves. It was like the world had paused. Then, I felt it. Not a vibration, but a sensation, like something brushing against my mind. It wasn't words or images, just an overwhelming sense of being observed. I pulled my hand back, heart pounding, but the feeling didn't go away. I backed away from the tree, unsure of what to do. My first instinct was to leave, but the logical part of me said I needed to document this. I set up my camera, pointing it at the hole I dug, and started recording. As I spoke into the microphone, describing what I'd found, the vibrations changed. They grew faster, more intense, and the ground beneath me started to hum. Then, the tree reacted. The roots shifted, creaking like old wood under strain. One of the massive roots lifted slightly, exposing more of the metallic surface. It wasn't random, it was deliberate, like the tree was working with the thing buried beneath it. I froze, watching as the exposed surface began to glow faintly, pulsing in time with the vibrations. I don't know what made me stay, but I couldn't move. The glow intensified, spreading across the ground in a web of light. It was beautiful and terrifying, like watching something far beyond human understanding. I felt that presence again, stronger this time, and it was no longer just observing. It was trying to communicate. The vibrations became patterns, and I realized they were sending a message. It wasn't in any language I knew, but it had structure, like a code. I grabbed my notebook, frantically trying to record the sequences. As I wrote, I felt a strange clarity, like my thoughts were being guided. The message wasn't just sounds, it was ideas, concepts, something I could almost understand but not quite. Then, just as suddenly as it started, it stopped. The glow faded, the vibrations ceased, and the forest came back to life. Birds chirped, leaves rustled, and the tree was just a tree again. The metal surface was still there, but it felt inert, like whatever had been active was now dormant. I didn't sleep that night. I stayed up, going over the patterns I'd recorded, trying to make sense of them. They didn't match any known code or language, but they felt deliberate, intelligent. I thought about the tree, how it had moved, how it seemed connected to whatever was buried beneath it. It wasn't just a plant. It was part of something much bigger. In the morning, I packed up my gear and left. I didn't tell anyone what I'd found. Part of me knew they wouldn't believe me, but the bigger part didn't want anyone else to disturb it. Whatever that thing was, it wasn't meant for us. It was old, older than the forest, maybe older than humanity, and it was still watching. I don't even know where to start with this, but I feel like I need to get it out somehow. It happened a few weeks ago when I went on a hiking trip with a couple of friends. We'd planned it for months, just a way to get away from everything for a weekend. The area we picked was a national park, pretty remote. No cell service, hardly any other people around, just the kind of quiet we were looking for. It started on the second day. We were following this old trail that was barely marked anymore. The kind of path where you had to keep an eye out for cairns or blazes on trees. It wasn't anything too difficult, but it was easy to get turned around if you weren't paying attention. That's why we all carried compasses. Phones were useless out there, and we didn't want to rely too much on GPS. We were about halfway through the day's hike when Sarah, one of my friends, noticed her compass wasn't working right. At first, we thought it was just a cheap compass. You know, those knockoff ones that can't hold a steady reading. But then Matt checked his, and it was the same. The needle spun slowly, like it couldn't make up its mind where north was. Mine did the same thing when I pulled it out. It wasn't windy, and we weren't near any big metal structures or anything like that. There shouldn't have been anything to mess with the magnetics, but none of our compasses worked. We thought maybe it was just a weird local phenomenon, like iron deposits in the ground. We laughed it off at first, joking that we'd hit the Bermuda Triangle of the woods. The weird thing was, the compasses weren't just broken. They were pointing somewhere. Not north, but a fixed direction that all three agreed on. It was subtle, like the needles were fighting to stay aligned, but they kept nudging toward the same spot. Curiosity got the better of us. We decided to follow where the compasses were leading. It wasn't part of our planned route, but we figured we could turn back if it got too sketchy. The terrain wasn't too bad, just dense trees and uneven ground. Every so often, we'd stop and check the compasses, and they'd still point the same way. It felt deliberate, like they were leading us somewhere. After about an hour of hiking, the air started to feel different. I know how that sounds, but it's the only way I can describe it. It was heavy, like a storm was about to break, even though the sky was clear. There was no wind, no sound of birds or insects, just us crunching through the underbrush. Sarah was the first to say something about it, and we all agreed it felt off. Then we found it. At first, it just looked like a patch of bare ground in the middle of the forest, maybe 10 feet across. The trees around it were all healthy, but nothing grew in that circle. No grass, no moss, just exposed dirt that looked almost burned, but not quite. In the center of the circle was this thing. It was partially buried, but enough of it stuck out for us to see it wasn't natural. It was metallic, but not shiny. The surface was dull, almost like brushed steel, but darker. It was shaped like a disc, about the size of a car tire lying flat, and there were markings on it. Not letters or symbols, just patterns that didn't make any sense. They weren't random, though they were too precise, too deliberate. None of us wanted to touch it, but we couldn't stop staring at it. The air felt thicker the closer we got, like it was pressing against our skin. Sarah said she could hear a low hum, but I couldn't hear anything at first. Then Matt said he felt vibrations through his boots when he stood near it. I stepped closer, and that's when I heard it too. A faint, almost musical hum, just at the edge of hearing. It wasn't mechanical, though. It felt alive. We argued about what to do next. Matt wanted to dig it up, see what it was. Sarah said we should mark the spot and report it when we got back to civilization. I just wanted to leave. The thing didn't feel right, like it was watching us even though it didn't have eyes. But curiosity won out, and we started clearing away the dirt around it. As we dug, the thing revealed more of itself. It wasn't just a disc, it was part of something much larger, embedded deep in the ground. The patterns covered the exposed surface, and the hum grew louder. Not deafening, but enough to make your chest vibrate. Then the markings started to glow. It wasn't a bright glow, more like a soft pulse, like the embers of a dying fire. But it wasn't random. The pulses followed a pattern, almost like Morse code. Matt tried to record it on his phone, but it wouldn't turn on. None of our electronics worked. Even Sarah's watch had stopped. That's when we heard the noise. It wasn't coming from the thing, it was coming from above us. A deep, rumbling sound, like something massive shifting in the sky. We looked up, but there was nothing there, just the empty blue sky. But the sound didn't stop. It grew louder, closer, like it was circling us. Panic set in. Matt tried to cover the thing back up, but the dirt wouldn't stick. It was like the ground had turned slick, almost oily. The hum became a steady tone, and the glowing patterns pulsed faster. We backed away, too scared to keep digging, but too curious to run. Then it stopped. The hum, the glow, the sound from above, everything went silent. The air felt normal again, and the compasses started working. The thing in the ground just sat there, dark and lifeless, like it had been before. But I swear as we turned to leave, I felt it watching us, not with eyes, but with something else. We didn't talk much on the hike back. When we got to the trailhead, we agreed not to tell anyone. Who would believe us? We didn't take any pictures, and the compasses didn't record their movements. All we had was the memory, and even that felt like it was slipping away. I don't know what we found, but I haven't been able to stop thinking about it. Sometimes when it's quiet, I hear that hum again, faint and distant. I don't know if it's real or just in my head. But whatever that thing was, it wasn't meant for us to find, and I can't shake the feeling that it wasn't done. It wasn't supposed to be a big expedition. Just a few of us who'd been caving for years, going to explore a system that had barely been mapped. It was deep in the mountains, far from any towns, a kind of place that felt untouched. We had a guide, local to the area, who told us the caves went on for miles. Some passages were tight, others opened into huge chambers, perfect for what we were looking for. The first day was uneventful. We descended through the main entrance, a wide gap in the rock face that sloped down into the earth. The air was cool, damp, and carried the smell of wet stone. There was nothing unusual about it. Stalactites, trickling water, the occasional bat. We marked our route, made notes, and set up camp in a dry chamber about 3 hours in. On the second day, we went deeper. The cave system branched off in several directions, and we decided to split into pairs to cover more ground. I went with Eric, a geologist who'd been on dozens of trips like this. He was methodical, always stopping to take samples and measurements, while I handled the mapping. We'd been exploring for a few hours when we found the chamber. At first, it didn't seem like anything special. The passage opened into a space about the size of a small house, with smooth walls and a ceiling that arched high above us. But then Eric pointed out something strange. The walls weren't entirely natural. There were grooves, evenly spaced, running in a spiral pattern from floor to ceiling. They looked carved, but not by tools, more like they'd been melted or shaped by something that didn't leave marks. In the center of the chamber was the artifact. That's the only word I can think of to describe it. It was about the size of a barrel, metallic and shaped like a cone with the tip broken off. The surface was covered in patterns that seemed to shift when you looked at them, as though they were alive. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light from our headlamps, but no, it was moving. Neither of us spoke for a while. We just stood there, staring at it. I don't know how long we stayed like that, but eventually, Eric broke the silence. He wanted to take a closer look, maybe even touch it. I wasn't so sure. Something about it made my skin crawl, like it didn't belong here. Or anywhere, for that matter. Eric didn't listen. He stepped closer and pulled out his tools, brushing away some of the dust and debris that had settled on the base. As he worked, a low hum started to fill the chamber. It wasn't loud, but it felt like it was vibrating in my chest. Eric froze, his hand hovering just above the surface of the artifact. "Do you hear that?" he asked. I nodded, but I didn't say anything. The hum was getting louder, and the air seemed heavier, like it was pressing down on us. That's when the artifact activated. I don't know how else to describe it. The hum turned into a deep, resonant sound that made the walls shake. Light started to pulse from the patterns on its surface, bright and sharp, like nothing I'd ever seen. Eric stumbled back, dropping his tools, and we both scrambled to the edge of the chamber. The sound grew louder, deeper, until it was almost unbearable. It wasn't just noise. It was energy. I could feel it in my bones, vibrating through me, making it hard to think. The walls of the chamber seemed to amplify it, focusing it into a single point above the artifact. Then, with a flash of blinding light, the sound stopped. The chamber was silent, the air still. For a moment, I thought it was over. But then we heard it, a low, distant rumble coming from somewhere far above us. The ground started to tremble, and bits of rock and dust fell from the ceiling. Eric grabbed my arm, yelling something I couldn't hear over the noise, and we ran. We made it back to the main passage just as the tremors subsided. I don't know how we managed to navigate the tunnels, but we eventually found the others. They were pale, shaken, and said they'd heard the sound too, even from the other side of the cave system. None of them had any idea what it was. We decided to leave. The artifact was too strange, too dangerous, and none of us wanted to stick around to see what would happen next. The hike back to the surface was tense, every sound and shadow making my heart race. When we finally emerged into the daylight, I felt a wave of relief until we saw the sky. There was something up there, just beyond the atmosphere. It looked like a faint ripple, like heat waves rising from pavement, but it moved with purpose. As we watched, it shifted and pulsed as though it were reacting to something. Then, with a final burst of light, it vanished. We didn't talk much on the way back to town. Eric and I tried to explain what we'd seen, but the others didn't want to hear it. By the time we reached civilization, it felt like we'd stepped back into a different world. The caves, the artifact, the light in the sky, it all seemed so far away. I don't know what the artifact was or why it reacted the way it did. But sometimes, late at night, I think about the sound it made, the way it seemed to call out, and I wonder if something somewhere heard it. I had been tracking the flock for over a week. The species was rare, some kind of migratory bird that only passed through the region once a year. I had seen them once before, years back, but never in numbers like this. They had settled in a remote area of the reserve, miles from any roads or trails. It took me 2 days just to hike out there, carrying my gear and a small tent. The birds were easy to spot. Their feathers caught the sunlight in a way that made them almost shimmer, and their calls were sharp and high, like nothing else I'd ever heard. I'd set up camp near the edge of a clearing where they roosted. Every morning, I watched them take off in a synchronized burst, hundreds of them moving together like a single organism. It was mesmerizing. That morning was no different at first. The air was cool, the sky a pale gray, and the forest around me was still waking up. I had my binoculars ready, scanning the trees, waiting for the flock to stir. When they did, it was sudden, like a switch had been flipped. One moment, they were still. The next, they were airborne, rising in a massive, twisting spiral above the clearing. I was about to grab my camera when I noticed something strange. The birds weren't moving the way they usually did. Instead of spreading out and heading toward the river, they were climbing higher and higher into the sky, circling tighter and tighter, like they were being pulled toward something. At first, I thought it was just an odd behavior, maybe a predator nearby. But then I saw it. The object was hovering just above the treetops, so still it almost blended into the clouds. It wasn't large, maybe the size of a small car, but it didn't look like anything I'd ever seen. It was smooth and featureless, a dull metallic gray that seemed to shift slightly when I tried to focus on it. There were no lights, no sound, nothing to indicate how it was staying in the air. It was just there, motionless, as if it had always been part of the sky. The birds were drawn to it. One by one, they broke from the spiral and flew straight toward the object. I watched through my binoculars as they disappeared into its surface, vanishing without a trace. There was no impact, no reaction from the object. It was like they were being absorbed. The sight made my stomach churn, but I couldn't look away. I tried to convince myself it was some kind of natural phenomenon, maybe an atmospheric mirage or a strange cloud formation, but deep down, I knew it wasn't. There was nothing natural about the way the birds moved or the way the object seemed to pulse faintly, like it was alive. I didn't know what to do. I thought about running, but my legs felt like they were made of lead. I thought about grabbing my camera, but the idea of moving, of drawing attention to myself, felt wrong. So I just stood there, frozen, watching as the last of the flock disappeared into the object. Then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the object began to rise. It moved so smoothly, so effortlessly that it didn't seem real. It climbed higher and higher until it was nothing more than a speck in the sky. And then it was gone, swallowed by the clouds. The forest was silent. The birds were gone, and with them, the usual sounds of the morning. Even the wind seemed to have stopped. I stood there for what felt like hours, my mind racing, trying to make sense of what I had just seen. Eventually, I forced myself to move. I packed up my gear and started the long hike back to the ranger station. I didn't look back, and I didn't stop until I was safely inside. I thought about reporting what I'd seen, but what would I say? That a flock of rare birds had been taken by a hovering, silent craft? No one would believe me. They'd think I was crazy, or worse, lying. I haven't been back to that part of the reserve since. The thought of it makes my skin crawl. Sometimes late at night, I can still hear the birds' sharp, high calls in my mind. And sometimes I wonder if they're still out there, wherever that thing took them. I was in the forest on a photography trip when it happened. I don't like cities much, and being out in the woods away from the noise was something I always looked forward to. I had my camera gear with me, hoping to get some good shots of the wildlife. The area I was in was pretty remote, a national forest about 2 hours from the nearest town. I'd been there a few times before and always saw plenty of deer, birds, and the occasional fox. It was early afternoon when I first noticed something odd. I had been following a narrow trail for a while, moving slowly and keeping an eye out for anything worth photographing. The forest was quiet, almost too quiet. Usually you could hear birds singing or squirrels rustling in the trees, but there wasn't much of that now. Just the sound of my boots on the dirt path and the occasional creak of the trees in the wind. I rounded a bend in the trail and saw a herd of deer up ahead, maybe a dozen of them. They were standing in a small clearing, just past a dense line of pines. At first, I was excited. I'd been hoping to find some deer to photograph, but as I got closer, I realized something wasn't right. They weren't moving. Not grazing, not walking, not even twitching their ears. They were all standing perfectly still, facing the same direction, like statues. I crouched down behind a bush and pulled out my camera, adjusting the zoom to get a better look. Through the lens, I could see their faces more clearly. Their eyes were wide, not in a normal way, but in a way that made my stomach knot up. They looked scared, or maybe entranced. All of them were staring at the same spot, deep in the forest. I followed their gaze, but I couldn't see what they were looking at, just trees and shadows. I watched them for a while, waiting for them to move, but they didn't. It was like they were frozen. Even the wind didn't seem to touch them. Their fur didn't ruffle, and their tails didn't flick. It was unnerving. After a while, I decided to investigate. I left my camera on the ground and slowly walked toward the clearing. The closer I got, the more I felt something strange in the air. It wasn't cold exactly, but the air felt heavier, like the pressure before a storm. My skin started to tingle, and the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. When I stepped into the clearing, the deer didn't react. They didn't even seem to notice me. I could have walked right up to them and touched one, and I don't think they would have moved. But I didn't try. Something about the way they stood there made me nervous. Instead, I kept going, following the direction they were looking. The trees got denser as I moved further in, and the light filtered through the branches in strange patterns. The tingling sensation got stronger. I started to hear a faint sound, like a low hum, coming from up ahead. It was barely audible at first, but it got louder the closer I got. It wasn't like anything I'd heard before. It wasn't a machine, and it wasn't natural. It had a rhythm to it, but it didn't match any sound I could recognize. Then I saw it. At first, I thought it was just a trick of the light. There was a glow coming from between the trees, soft and faint, like moonlight, but wrong for the time of day. As I got closer, I saw the source of the light. It was a sphere, about the size of a beach ball, hovering a few feet off the ground. It wasn't solid, at least not in the way I understood solid. The surface seemed to ripple and shift like liquid metal, but it didn't drip or flow. The glow wasn't steady either. It pulsed, growing brighter and dimmer in a rhythm that seemed deliberate. I froze, unsure of what to do. The hum was louder now, resonating in my chest. It felt almost like music, but it wasn't music. It was something else entirely. The sphere didn't move, but I got the sense it was aware of me. That sounds crazy, but that's the only way I can describe it. It felt like it was watching me, even though it didn't have eyes. Then I noticed the animals. The deer weren't the only ones there. Birds were perched silently on the branches above, their heads turned toward the sphere. A fox was crouched low to the ground nearby, its body tense but unmoving. Even a pair of raccoons sat still, staring at the same spot. None of them reacted to me. They were all fixated on the sphere, like they were in some kind of trance. I don't know how long I stood there, staring at it. It could have been minutes, or it could have been hours. Time felt different. The sphere pulsed, and the hum seemed to change, shifting in tone and intensity. It wasn't random. It felt like it was trying to communicate, but I couldn't understand what it was saying. I started to feel lightheaded, like I was standing too close to something I wasn't supposed to be near. Finally, I backed away. Slowly at first, then faster as the hum grew louder. The animals didn't follow me. They didn't even seem to notice I was leaving. I ran back to the clearing where the deer had been, but they were gone. The whole forest felt different, like the air was lighter now, but the sense of unease stayed with me. I didn't stop running until I reached my truck. I drove away as fast as I could, not looking back. I haven't been back to that forest since. I don't know what I saw, and I'm not sure I want to know. But sometimes when I close my eyes at night, I can still hear that hum, faint and distant, like a memory I can't shake. I didn't plan to be out that night. It was a spur-of-the-moment thing, grabbing my telescope and heading to the park. I guess I just needed a break from everything, some time to myself under the stars. The weather was clear, and the air felt cool enough to make it comfortable. The park wasn't far from where I lived, just a short walk, so I didn't bother telling anyone where I was going. I figured I'd only be gone a couple of hours. The park wasn't busy at night, which was perfect for me. A few streetlights lined the main path, but beyond that, it was mostly dark. There's a hill at the far end of the park that gives you a decent view of the sky, so that's where I set up. I carried my telescope in its case and brought a small backpack with a notebook, a flashlight, and some snacks. The hill was quiet, just me and the crickets chirping. I could hear the faint hum of cars in the distance, but it didn't bother me. I set up my telescope and pointed it toward the eastern sky. It wasn't anything special, just a mid-range model I'd picked up a few years ago, but it worked well enough for stargazing. I started with the usual things, bright stars, constellations, a few planets I could identify. It was relaxing, just sitting there looking up at the vastness of space. After a while, I noticed something odd. There was a cluster of stars near the horizon that didn't look right. They weren't part of any constellation I knew, and their arrangement seemed too perfect, like they'd been placed there on purpose. At first, I thought it might be some kind of optical illusion, or maybe my telescope was out of alignment. I adjusted the lens, checked the focus, but the pattern didn't change. The stars were arranged in a grid-like formation with equal spacing between them. It wasn't natural. I couldn't explain it, but something about it felt off. I sat there for a long time, staring at the pattern, trying to make sense of it. Then I noticed something else. The stars were blinking, not in the way stars normally twinkle. This was different. They were blinking in a sequence, one after the other, like they were following a rhythm. I grabbed my notebook and started writing down the pattern. At first, it didn't make any sense, just a series of dots and dashes like Morse code. But the more I looked at it, the more I felt like it was deliberate, like someone or something was trying to communicate. I didn't know what to do. I didn't have a computer with me, and my phone was back at home. I thought about going back to get it, but I was afraid the pattern might change or disappear if I left. So I stayed there, staring through the telescope, writing down every blink, every sequence. Hours passed, but I couldn't bring myself to stop. Around midnight, the blinking changed. The pattern slowed down, becoming more regular, almost like it was waiting for a response. I don't know why, but I felt like it was watching me, like it knew I was there. The thought sent a chill down my spine. I shined my flashlight around, half expecting to see someone standing behind me, but there was nothing. Just the empty park and the sound of the wind in the trees. I turned back to the telescope and adjusted the focus again. That's when I saw it. It wasn't just stars. There was something else, something faint but unmistakable, just beyond the grid. It looked like a shape, dark and massive, blocking out part of the sky. It wasn't a cloud or a shadow. It was solid, and it was moving, slowly but deliberately. My hands were shaking as I tried to keep the telescope steady. The object was huge, bigger than anything I had ever seen. It looked like a ship, but not like any ship I could imagine. Its surface was smooth, almost reflective, and it had no visible lights or markings. It just hovered there, silent and ominous, on the edge of the atmosphere. The blinking stars, if they were stars, seemed to be coming from the ship. They weren't part of the sky at all. They were part of it. I felt a wave of panic rising in my chest. This wasn't normal. This wasn't right. I thought about packing up and running home, but my legs felt like they were glued to the ground. Then the blinking started again, faster this time. The grid shifted, and the lights formed a new pattern. It took me a moment to realize what it was. They were letters, English letters. I could hardly believe it, but there it was, spelled out in the sky. Help. I froze. My mind was racing. Help? Help with what? Who or what needed help? I didn't know what to do. My first instinct was to yell, to scream into the night, but I knew that wouldn't accomplish anything. Instead, I grabbed my notebook and started writing down the letters as they appeared. The message kept coming, one word at a time. Danger. Trapped. Escape. I couldn't make sense of it, but the urgency was clear. Whatever was out there, it was in trouble, and it was reaching out to me. I felt a strange mix of fear and responsibility, like I'd been chosen for something I didn't understand. Then, just as suddenly as it started, the blinking stopped. The grid of lights faded, and the massive ship began to move. It didn't accelerate or make any noise. It just drifted away, disappearing into the darkness like a shadow melting into the night. I stared after it, my heart pounding, until the sky was empty again. I sat there for a long time, trying to process what I'd seen. The message, the ship, the lights. It all felt like a dream, but the notes in my hand were proof it wasn't. I packed up my telescope and walked home in a daze, replaying the events over and over in my mind. I still don't know what it meant or why it chose me. I've gone back to the park a few times since then, hoping to see the lights again, but the sky has been normal. Just stars and constellations, nothing unusual. I've thought about telling someone, scientists, authorities, anyone, but I don't know how to explain it without sounding crazy. All I have are my notes and the memory of that night. I can't shake the feeling that it wasn't just a random encounter. It felt deliberate, like a warning or a plea for help. Whatever it was, it's out there somewhere, and I can't stop wondering if it will come back.